have entered the PM Entertainment Podcast.
Welcome to an all-new episode of the PM Entertainment Podcast, the show that loves a wailing late 80s saxophone, the neon-drenched, grimy and seedy streets of Los Angeles, and any production company that hands the reins over to the incomparable Wings Hauser and lets him throw victims out of windows, feed booze to a bunny rabbit on the beach, and create some sort of jazz-fueled, sexually charged, life-questioning gonzo Hollywood parody by way of a grindhouse neo-noir. I, of course, refer to the mighty and important movie-making juggernaut founded by Rick Pepin and Joseph Merhi, which, while known for its action hijinks and straight-to-video mashup versions of the latest Hollywood blockbusters, occasionally would allow a rare and vivid talent to turn auteur and cobble together a glorious, deranged, and avant-garde genre film. I'm your host, John Cross, and don't forget, if you like the show, please remember to rate and review us on any of the podcasting platforms you use. Share our Facebook posts, like, comment, and you can contact us via our email, pmentpod@gmail.com. That's PMENTpod, P-O-D, @gmail.com. This week, we change our plans somewhat because having heard the news of the recent tragic passing of that towering, unique talent, intense, sometimes baffling actor, and all-round B-movie legend and grindhouse icon, Wings Hauser, we felt we had to do a celebratory memorial episode. I've been a fan of Wings Hauser ever since I got to see Vice Squad and a little later Tough Guys Don't Dance on the big screen in New York City some years back. Since then, I've collected his movies on VHS, DVD, and Blu-ray wherever and whenever I found them. He is one of those fascinating and special performers that are at 1 minute completely unpredictable and in the next frighteningly real. He could be an action star, a dramatic character actor, an interesting improviser, a man wrestling with innumerable demons, and a vicious, unwavering villain, sometimes all in the course of one film. Watching his films always made me think 95% of Hollywood doesn't know what acting is, and all award shows are nonsensical gibberish, because if there was any justice in the world, Wings would have been showered with accolades and cast in everything. Yes, so sadly, Wings Hauser passed away. It was announced on March 20th, a week or so ago. I believe it happened a few days before it was actually announced. Anyway, I put the feelers out on Facebook to see what people felt and to see if there would be any comments or emails or anything, and we did get an email. We also got a couple of voicemails, one about Wings Hauser, but unfortunately the person didn't leave their name, so I don't know who it is. But I will play the voicemail anyway. And then we got a wonderful voicemail just about the show in general from a Mr. Matt Beckett. Anyone listening to this show who has also listened to my previous and still existing podcast, The After Movie Diner, will hopefully remember Matt Beckett, as he used to write in and send voicemails pretty regularly, and has told me that he's been listening this whole time and just hadn't sent any messages in, but has now sent some audio in. So we've got an email that I'm going to read out. We've got a voicemail. We've got a couple of comments from Facebook, and then this voicemail from Matt Beckett. All right, so first up, we have an email from none other than Mr. Andy Lunn. People who have listened to the After Movie Diner in the past will know Mr. Lunn from his many emails that he used to send us during the Sleazy Spader Springtime series that we used to do. And here he is writing his very own Wings tribute. He says, "Hi, still can't believe that Wings has gone. Although he'd been in a load of movies and TV shows over the years, it was only having started my own PM journey a year or so ago, and I have you to thank for that, John, that I'd started to appreciate the man's work. What a career he had. I discovered whilst going down a Hauser rabbit hole that he'd appeared in both Monk and House. He'd also made 4 separate appearances in Murder, She Wrote. I'll have seen him in all of those shows and not realized. Certainly worth a revisit. My question for the show is simple, although the answer may not be as easy. Can you give us a handful of classic Wings Hauser moments which made him stand out as a true PM Entertainment star and as a pretty unique character? Love the show, although sad that this episode has to exist. All the best, Lun." So I feel that we go pretty deep and specific into some pretty unique Wings Hauser moments in the art of dying, both from in front of and behind the camera during this episode. So I won't rehash a lot of that. And then you've got Living to Die, and I think what is probably most memorable about that are more Wings as a director and some of his directorial choices in that film. And again, you know, the dialogue in that movie and some of the film noir pretensions in that film are absolutely fantastic. And I don't really want to necessarily, again, go over every little bit in that movie because A, I would urge you to watch it, and secondly, we will cover it at some point on the show. And while there are lots of standout moments, Wings Hauser watching in delight as his aggressive gangster friend makes a very angry sandwich was one of my favorites. And there's some great action in that movie. It's probably the monologue he does that ends with him saying to the woman something along the lines of, "You and Jimmy Fargo putting the bite on Eddie Mittens," wherever he says some kind of real, like, hard-boiled line. And then he obviously told the actress to, like, really slap him around the face at the end of the shot. And she really takes her shot. Like, she belts him across the face. And Wings' reaction, as a lot of Wings' stuff is pure improv and very real, that's a delight. That scene particularly is a delight. But in terms of Wings moments, I sort of think in Living to Die, it's both some of the choices that he made as a director and also the fact that he stuck with that ending. I think you just don't expect that ending. And then, but in terms of performance, I think my my favorite sort of Wings Hauser bit of business in all of the films that he was in for PM Entertainment, and he was in 4 of them, Cold Fire, Living to Die, The Art of Dying, and Killer's Edge, also known as Blood Money. My favorite kind of Wings Hauser bit of business is actually from Killer's Edge, also known as Blood Money. They're in a pawn shop that Wings claims is also a bookie joint. And he has a sort of smaller, less fierce partner in this movie. And the partner's not getting it done. He's trying to question the guy behind the counter, and it's just not working out. And Wings has sort of been poking around the back of the pawn shop and playing with some old computer they have on the shelf or whatever, trying to say to his partner, "Oh, let us handle it. Like, don't call it in. Don't get a warrant. Don't worry about it. We'll just handle it." And his partner's like, no, we're going to do it by the book. Anyway, while the partner's trying to get answers unsuccessfully from the guy behind the counter, Wings notices a guy coming from the back of the shop with a gun. So Wings just spins around, shoots him right in the head, pushes his partner out of the way, slides everything off the counter, and just goes, "Listen to me, fuck." And the way he does it is absolutely incredible. And then while he's like berating the owner of the shop, another guy comes from around the corner, and without even breaking his concentration, Wings just shoots him in the chest and goes right back to questioning the shop owner. It's one of the most goofy yet amazing yet psychotic bits of Wings Hauser business, I think, in all of his roles with PM. So I'll say that for now, Andy. But honestly, I can encourage you to watch all 4 of his PM Entertainment films because of all his B-movies and straight-to-video stuff, they rank very high up there The two Gregory Dark movies he did, Dead Man Walking and Street Asylum, are also fantastic. And obviously check out some of his key titles like Vice Squad, Tough Guys Don't Dance, Siege of Firebase Gloria, Mutant. Some of those films are absolutely fantastic as well. The Carpenter that just got a Blu-ray release. Andy, please continue on both your Wings Hauser and your PM Entertainment journeys. So we had a few Facebook comments. Keith McAfee said, been trying to pick up some Hauser's flicks on DVD lately, but they're really hard to find. I did manage to pick up a copy of Nightmare at Noon, though. Bizarre and strangely entertaining. So, interestingly, to find Wings Hauser's filmography out there in the wild, it's either going to be VHS or Blu-ray. There are DVDs out there. There's a DVD of Mutant, which is pretty easy to find. I think Amazon has several copies and eBay and other places. And a couple of others I have on DVD. I think Broken Bars I have as a German import and a couple of others. But most of it is either Blu-ray, because quite a few have been put out on Blu-ray. Deadly Force, LA Bounty, The Wind, all that kind of stuff. And then most of my collection is on VHS. So good luck with your Wings Hauser journey, and I hope you find the movies you're looking for. David McStonner said, I just recently started deep diving Hauser's films, having only seen him in a couple of flicks before. I watched The Art of Dying and Living to Die recently, and they were both great. Looking forward to the pod. Thanks, David. So Eric Levitt said, oh no, I loved him on some episodes of Murder, She Wrote. He will be missed. R.I.P. Wings. Justin Coffrin said, R.I.P. to a PM veteran. Charlie Chase said, we just spoke about him last night on the Action Elite stream. Shout out to my friends over at the Action Elite. If you're not following them, go follow them now. He was an associate producer and uncredited writer for Uncommon Valor, R.I.P. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, he did write Uncommon Valor. And then Jacobson Hart, who himself wrote several of the greatest PM Entertainment films, commented and said, Charlie, when I met him, he told me he was set to play Blaster in that film. But when they recast the role, he spent 6 months in Mexico drinking his blues away. R.I.P. All right, so now we have a couple of voicemails. The first one up is about Wings Hauser. And as I said, no one left their name. So if when you hear this, whoever you are, if you hear this, please write to us at pmentpod@gmail.com. Write to us on there or send us a message on Facebook and let us know who it was. We do have a great group of people on the Facebook page and on the Instagram page, but mostly on the Facebook page, who comment, who share, who like, all that good stuff. It's so wonderful to see it. I try and respond to everything. Thanks so much for being so active on the Facebook page, and hopefully that will only continue.
Man, Wings Hauser was one of the most incredible just personalities I've ever seen on screen. First seeing him in Tough Guys Don't Dance, which I immediately showed my group of friends. His character, Alvin Luther Regency, great triple name. Just, he's so manic at times and affably psychotic. I've seen it so many times. I got to see it on film last year in a just wonderful presentation. Yeah, he's meant a lot to me in a weird way. And yeah, seeing him in Vice Squad as Ramrod or Deadly Force as Stoney Cooper, which I think is a sadly underseen movie, and I wish it had done better for him. It's a real shame, a real loss. But he's left an incredible body of work, and I will definitely miss him.
Hello, John. Matt Beckett here. Just calling in to offer my appreciation for the PM Entertainment podcast, a visionary new venture which, in its first 2 episodes, has set and already met such ambitious goals that it epitomizes the epigram, go big or go home. Each episode's wonderful combination of interviews, reviews, and bullet points has offered a fascinating insight into, as you put it, the PM process. The recollections of the fabulously personable Joseph Merhi were a powerful reminder of how important collaboration is to an effective and rewarding filmmaking process. As Mr. Merhi said, in a manner reminiscent of the style of the school of Roger Corman, the caterer can have a good idea, and the next thing he knows, he's directing a movie. And then, to also hear from the stuntwork legend that his Spiro Rosatos was absolutely remarkable. I've admired his coordinating and directing work, combining bodies and bumpers, ever since The Ambulance, back in 1990. His recognition of the invaluable role of his regular collaborators, "I've taken pay cuts so that I could keep my team together," was refreshing and inspirational. Both men have created a filmmaking family around them, a repertory company producing work of consistency and quality, developing, as you observed, such a distinctive shorthand that it arguably helped to make the PM label its own subgenre within the action movie landscape. Your discussions with your guest hosts have also been both entertaining and thought-provoking. It was a real pleasure to see the PM movies appreciated for their entertainment value without ironic detachment. It was particularly delightful to hear Brett and Ty Barger's reflex response when you asked for some other standout C. Thomas Howell pictures to recommend both Tapestry Films' Kid and the Roger Corman-produced Suspect Device before the more commonly lauded The Hitcher. Similarly, when you and the Doc considered the greater scope of Gary Daniels' pictures, you both reached for Cold Harvest sometime before The Expendables. And if I might, I would like to offer a brief honourable mention for Albert Pune's Knights, which offers amongst its many treasures the spectacle of a Gary Daniels one-on-one with a most unexpected adversary, given the usual traits and tropes of the genre. The 90s foremost Brit kicker faces off with the subject of the memorable miscellaneous plumbing fixtures anthem, Mr. Chris Christopherson. Many thanks again, John, for 2 exceptional new episodes and the promise of more. At astonishing speed and no doubt involving countless panes of broken glass, I'm very much looking forward to going along for the ride.
Our guest this week for the last 18 years or more has run the YouTube channel Riot at the Movies, where, through Terrible Fest and other endeavors, has championed no-budget and low-budget film from around the world. Shot on film, shot on mini-DV, or shot on your phone, it's all the same to him. This Toronto native is also a writer, a film director, and an actor from such indisputable classics as Teddy Bomb, Assault on the Snake Men, and Amityville Outhouse. He knows all about getting it done by hook or by crook and not judging the results too harshly. It's the legendary Adam Riot Thorn. Sir, a huge welcome to the show, and thanks so much for doing this.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to see you again, John. When you were on my show, we were talking highly about Wings, having no idea that the next time we would talk would be without him.
Yeah, indeed. And it is sad, and I have felt it, and I have gone back and watched some of his performances again. And as I said in that intro, yes, a man, I think, beset upon sometimes by demons, but still made for just a compelling, and I think the word unique. I mean, I can't think of another actor like Wings. I mean, there's people like Michael Moriarty, for example, who has sort of similar unexpected rhythms and sort of weirdly realistic portrayals. I think of Q the Winged Serpent for a specific powerhouse performance by Moriarty that I feel is similar to Wings in that regard. But in general, not many people like Wings Hauser out there.
I always thought of, if I was to compare to anyone that's maybe a little more known, is a young Gary Busey, like an early 80s Gary Busey.
Right.
Because both of them have the genetics and the shape and the jawline of a very handsome leading man. But when you look in their eyes, there's something off and creepy, and just sort of the way that they carry themselves or can easily change. Of course, Gary's whole life didn't turn only into that.
Right.
But at his height, I think there's a very similar deranged, handsome man is what that became. So you never knew where you were going to go with them.
Yes, he definitely has a similar vibe to a Gary Busey. I suppose the closest you get in a weird way in modern times is probably a Nick Cage, just in the sense that Nick can play, multiple different roles, good, bad, weird. I think that's too easy a comparison. It doesn't quite explain the beauty of Wings, but for people who have not seen a lot of Wings Hauser films and have not dived into some of the depths that I've dived into, then I think Nick Cage is probably the closest, just because people know him to do both Hollywood movies and B movies. They know that he stretches himself, explores different characters, goes wild sometimes, and other times is quite subdued. And I feel like Wings has that throughout his resume, those kind of things. I do wish that he was in more, bigger movies. I do wish that we'd got maybe, I know his character turn in The Insider is one that is cited a lot, but I would have loved to have seen someone like a Michael Mann or a Tony Scott or someone like that hiring him. Some of those directors who I think have a little bit more, or Walter Hill. I mean, why did Walter Hill never cast Wings Hauser? Come on now. There's the Hauser and Hill, they're made for each other, surely.
Yeah, as soon as you mentioned like Michael Mann, I had to think for a moment, was Wings ever a random villain in a Miami Vice episode? Because he did as much early TV in the 80s. Like, he was definitely a villain on an episode of A-Team once.
Yes.
And so the fact that they didn't cross paths somehow, especially in their early mid 80s, is kind of surprising. Definitely with Hill, just because of the type of people that they worked with.
Right.
Rewatching Creature not too long ago, where it's like, oh, he's really supposed to be a nice, good guy, but there's still something very anti-hero about him.
Yes.
Where I could see how television, especially at that point in the 80s, could have grabbed him and used that. But connecting back to your Nick Cage comment, both Wings and Nick Cage leave audiences, no matter what role they do, it leaves you with a moment where once the film is over, you question how much of that was the actor and how much of that was the character. There's always this bit where it feels like Wings took over at some point.
Oh, 100%. And I think that I'm always weirdly drawn to that because it blurs the line between live performance and film. Very often film actors are so exceptionally good at just film acting that you're not getting that excitement from them. You're just going, all right, okay, this was a well-written script, this is a well-performed part, and it's well-directed.
Well, there's lots of stories of people talking about working with Wings, and they always sort of give him this sort of era of mystery where they say, like, he was such a personality. Like, if he wasn't like anybody else on set, he'd be a good story or a bad story. Some people have negative, some have positive, but no matter what their angle of their story of being in the room with him, they give you this impression that he is different. And right. So us as fans, having never met him, we all kind of imagine that he was disruptive, or like it would be the kind of person who would all of a sudden just turn the tables on things, and a director would just be like, nah, whatever, let him do it.
Right.
But we don't know necessarily. We just know because I have a feeling people started, like Nick Cage again as well, people started to tell those stories. They enjoyed telling those stories. So no one ever went around to be like, he wasn't really that bad.
Right.
Because that wouldn't be as fun to tell. We don't want to know that.
Yeah, no, I understand. And I often think that the difficult tag that gets stuck on people is sometimes, here's my thing about like the whole difficult tag, right? People will still talk in hushed tones about Marlon Brando as if he was the greatest actor of all time that ever existed, ever, right? And yet, for most of the movies that we know him from, and I'm talking about the movies that he did from the 70s onwards, right? He's taking his pants off. He's reading lines off cue cards. He's, sometimes not even saying the line. Sometimes he's late. Sometimes he doesn't come on set. Sometimes when he comes on set, he wants to change stuff completely. He flies into rages, all the rest of it. Yet no one ever said like Marlon Brando was difficult. Yet I'm always like, listen, you're paid to do a job. Show up and do your damn job. You know what I mean? And then there's the story that I've told before about like Michael Caine, where Michael Caine will say 1 minute, well, this is a serious movie, so I'm going to show up and I'm going to do a great performance. But this is The Island, and I'm just here for a paycheck. Or this is The Hand with Oliver Stone. I'm just here to pay for my new garage. So I'm not going to bother. I'm just going to phone this one in. And that also pisses me off because I'm like, no. Doesn't matter if you're being paid 20 grand, if you're being paid 20 million. You're an actor. You're being paid to show up and work. Show up and work. You know what I mean? You don't get to go like, well, this is a B movie, so I don't care about it. Fuck that. No. This is a B movie. Care about it more than you would care about a Hollywood movie, because a Hollywood movie will have all the bells and whistles around you to make you look great anyway, no matter what you do. But a B movie needs you to show up and chew that scenery. And I'll say this for Wings Hauser and others who might get the difficult thing. They showed up, they chewed the scenery, and they often carried movies that otherwise would no longer be talking about. Now, you know, again, I understand that there were moments behind the scenes where Wings was not necessarily, as we would call it nowadays, on the up and up. And I don't condone any of that behavior. But I condone someone who, no matter what movie they were in, you know, showing up and belting it out to the cheap seats every time, because that's what he's there for and that's what he's being paid for. And that's so there's my little rant about that.
Well, there's all sorts of preconceived notions for Wings, and I will say this of myself. Like, even watching him on the like season that he was a regular cameo on Roseanne.
Yes,
he's supposed to be just a dad. You know, he's the girl from the Halloween movie's dad and that. And but you see him, and you're always waiting for something really negative to happen,
right,
the whole time. And it's just, I mean, Roseanne in its good written days actually did pull out some heavy-handed truths in it amongst the laughs. So it was very much, when I saw him on it and already knowing what he was like, I thought, oh, something really bad's going to be about his character, even when that was not the direction. But for certain films, like mentioning Creature already was one of those like first things I ever saw, of course. And then which Watchers is he? Watchers 3?
Watchers 3. When you say Creature, do you mean Mutant? Like it's also called Mutant. It's called multiple different names around the country, around the world. Yeah.
Yeah. His sort of zombie movie.
Yeah.
Pretty straightforward genre films of the time. But then, of course, eventually, after seeing the cover forever, seeing him with a cowboy hat and pictures and clips, and seeing his eyes on the silver cover of Vice Squad, I'd head off for so long. In my mind, I didn't know anything about the movie. I thought it was again going to be this film where he was just a rough-edged cop that was sort of a bad guy. I didn't know he was the bad guy.
Yes.
And when I saw that, I was so messed up by his character.
Yes.
For him quoting himself, too, by saying, like, just the effect that had on people, his role in that movie is so harsh and so evil that it made me insecure on any time he seemed to be a slightly problematic character. But it was like his like appearance in an episode of, I think he's in more than one Murder, She Wrote. My first reaction is, well, he's the murderer.
Right, exactly.
And that's not the case.
So as this is the PM Entertainment podcast, a couple of questions about your history, if there is any, with PM Entertainment. Can you remember if and when you first came across a PM Entertainment film?
First film I can remember watching, I wasn't aware of PM Entertainment and the whole scheme of it, but of course, as a bad movie lover, Skyscraper came across my way, and we were all loving the hilariousness of that, and there's so much to talk about that movie. So I've watched that so many times, but when I first knew that I was going into it watching because of the history of PM Entertainment, a few guys from the Toronto Film Festival had actually found some reels of some films and found a reel of Hologram Man.
Wow.
And we watched that in a theater, and we got to see with a big crowd watching Hologram Man, where nobody really knew what they were getting into with that.
Yeah.
Only with the warning of telling people to watch that anytime someone falls off something, there'll magically be a glass table for them to land on.
Yeah.
And then to understand that perfect ramp up of action, which then after that led me to kind of go down a rabbit hole, realizing that now in present day with present media, they're actually are everywhere. So then I think then the next thing that was like, oh, I need to see this now, knowing of it, would be Firepower,
right?
Because its simplisticness won Gary Daniels and The Ultimate Warrior.
Right.
I may have some problems with that movie, but as the teenager in me jumped back out again. I'd already maybe been 30 by that point, but I was like, oh, 16-year-old me would have loved this. How did I not know this existed when it was happening?
Right. And just the fact as well that there is such this self-contained kind of 12 years of PM Entertainment. They made 12 years of movies and then stopped. And yes, there's City Lights that come just before it, which I think would probably be, I don't know how many of the City Lights movies you've seen, but I've seen 2 or 3 of them, and I think they would be completely up your street because they are, if PM Entertainment is low budget, City Lights is like the low budget PM Entertainment. City Lights is the run and gun, shoot it without a permit, you shot on 16 mil or video versions of what would then, 15, 20 movies down the line kind of become PM Entertainment. So City Lights is its own thing. We're not covering that too much on the podcast right now. I kind of want to get through the PM Entertainment stuff and the well-known PM Entertainment stuff. But City Lights is definitely interesting because it's kind of the proto PM. But I think what is interesting about PM Entertainment, the wild swings that they were taking, either with their big action movies, ramping 3 cars in a city bus through an entire wall of flame at the beginning of Hologram Man, while John Amos and Joe Lara like firing away at, vehicular madness on the highway. Or in the case of something like the film we're covering on this episode, The Art of Dying, where they've leaned into, as I said, the sort of neon-drenched, seedy streets of Los Angeles and given Wings Hauser carte blanche to make a sort of film noir meets violent grindhouse movie. But either way, they kind of put their money where their mouth is. They put everything on screen, and I think have created a really interesting legacy. They're just satisfying. They're like 85 minutes in and done. They blow a ton of shit up. They have a charismatic leading guy. They put about 4 different plots together, and away we go. And there's just something about it, that just the run and gun style of it, that is endlessly charming to me compared to either the modern equivalent or the Cannons, Vestrons, and Vidmarks of the world.
Well, with what we are going to talk about today of Art of Dying, though, I constantly forget it's a PM film, right? Because PM did release lots of stuff, and it doesn't fit into what I immediately think of as the big explosion at the beginning, huge caliber, lots of gun shells everywhere. It doesn't have that, and as much as almost everything that I've watched with Wings is a quotes unquote action film, I can't think of Wings really ever being in that kind of a film.
I agree. There's always, any of the movies that Hauser would make, there is always some other element than just the action for you to kind of follow through with or enjoy in the movie. So out of all the PM Entertainment films you've watched, do you have a favorite? Do you have 1 or 2 or 3 favorites where you're like, that's the sweet spot for me of PM Entertainment?
I think Hologram Man is for me, just because that's kind of when I first sort of opened my eyes to look into it all. And it also feels like it's paced like my favorite movie of all time, Nemesis. Right. Which Nemesis is this other weird Albert Pune that's somewhere trapped in between PM and canon.
Yes.
It's like, where did that come from? Forget all the other sequels and spin-offs and things, but that first movie is so crazy, and just this kid in a video store, that moment when teenage me found that in a video store for the first time, and the fact that I didn't see Hologram Man until my 30s, but it was the same feeling. So Therefore they've stuck in there. They're like a cartoon with adult edges, but if you explain it to somebody, it could be no different than a G.I. Joe episode. But then you show it to someone and then they're like, oh, G.I. Joe's got really messed up.
Okay, excellent. So on to the film then.
Unless you've got the choice of having Malibu, the American Gladiator film that both T-Force and Skyscraper have.
Yes.
Then those always have to be in my collection. I have a weird collection of films that star Malibu.
Okay.
I can't really explain that. Just a weird thing in my collection.
See, T-Force to me is the better movie than Hologram. I find T-Force more satisfying than Hologram Man, but it is one of those that people go back and forth on, I think.
I want T-Force to be the mid '90s, right when there was the thing called Action Pack that started Hercules and Xena, and it had all
Yes.
these like movies of the nights of John Woo's Vanishing Sons and Knight Rider 2000. It feels like T-Force should have been in there and should have been a pilot to a TV series where Jack Scalia is dealing with his really low budget version of Blade Runner for the rest of his life.
Right, while carrying around the weirdly talkative brain of his dead ex-robot
Right.
partner.
But instead got a TV series called was it Tequila and Bonetti, his ripoff of Turner and Hooch, but the dog talks.
Yes. Listen, I will watch. I think Skilly is another one. I will watch him in damn near anything. He is so charismatic and charming. And T-Force and Deadly Breed, he carries both those. Like, those movies are as good as those movies are because of Jack Scalia, in the same way that this Art of Dying is really elevated by Wings. So
he's another guy that I wish people knew more about and did more things. Lara is sort of the loser hero in Hologram Man. The reason that it's as comical as it is because he's never aware of it. And he's so kind of plastic. He doesn't realize that he's a loser hero. So therefore, he never plays it. Wings almost often is, even if he is the good guy, he's still kind of the loser bad guy.
Yes.
But he has an emotion for it. You witness him break down. You witness him be angry or sad or whatever.
I mean,
he has emotions.
We'll get into it with this movie, but
exactly.
Yeah, there's yes, just like in Hologram Man, you know, after every single action scene, it then cuts back to like the regroup. And Joe Lara's like, right, for our next plan, we're going to go in and do this. And then, you know, they go in and do this and then fail each time. There is a running thread in PM Entertainment films, and it applies to this movie we're about to talk about. But there's a running thread in PM Entertainment movies where a character, regardless of all evidence presented to them, regardless of they don't follow any code, any rules. They've not captured any bad guys. They're not doing any detective work. There will be a character in a PM Entertainment movie will be like, he's a good cop. And there's always like they have to have another character reassert the fact that this person we've watched completely being the worst cop of all time. It happens in The Sweeper with C. Thomas Howell as well. Like, worst cop of all time. Wouldn't want him on the force for more than 5 minutes. I'd take one look at his beads, his goatee beard, and his silly hat, and go, get the fuck out. But and he beats up everybody, beats up everyone, throws people off roofs, everything like that, just like Hauser does in this movie.
Right.
And yet people are always
has a character for that.
Right. And people are always trying to tell people he's a good cop. I'm like, if you think he's a good cop, we're all fucked. Anyway.
And I love the actress who does that in this movie. So whenever you want to talk about it, I could talk about her all day.
Yeah, so that's Sarah Douglas, right?
Yeah.
Yes, from Superman 2. All right, let's get into it then. All right, our film on this episode is the Wings Hauser, directed, starring, and partially written and mostly improvised by sleazy film noir meets grungy serial killer flick, The Art of Dying. It's from 1991. It's co-written by Joseph Merhi, shot by Rick Pepin, edited by Paul Volk, and with a maddening jazz-filled musical score by John Gonzalez, all of whom are regular PM Entertainment players. Featuring the scorching and soaring saxophone of Lon Price, who has played on albums from such luminaries as Joan Armatrading, Leonard Cohen, Al Jarreau, Chris Christopherson, The Temptations, Babs Streisand, and even Dwight Yoakam. So no slouch there. It also features the trumpet stylings of one Rick Braun, who has released many trumpet-based albums over the years, but Pinot Noir Brass and Around the Horn are definitely two of my favorites. And lastly, on the score, there is the drum soloist David Compton, who sadly passed away in 2013. And although it doesn't mention The Art of Dying in his obituary, it does let us know that his children, Olivia and Harrison, weirdly share the same name as George Harrison's widow, Olivia Harrison. Coincidence? We will probably never know. Wings himself, as you know, was a singer-songwriter and musician, releasing the albums Vision of Sunshine by the band of the same name in 1970, and in 1975, Hauser released an album for RCA titled Your Love Keeps Me Off the Streets, using the name Wings Livin' Right, spelled LivinrYte, probably because the last name Hauser seemed too sensible. Anyway, he also wrote and performed the Vice Squad theme song Neon Slime, and his song The Old West appears in The Art of Dying. Wings was a true Renaissance gent of the highest order. Now, before we review and chat about the film, it's time for the PM Entertainment Bullet Points.
It's the PM Entertainment Bullet Points.
Okay, we have cops that are too cool to park correctly, immense amount of chatter about how Wings Hauser needs to get laid, soaring sleazy saxophone, upright bass, and 90s neon-drenched film noir stylings. Wings gets thrown against a wall multiple times, his partner gets stabbed, Wings throws a domestic abuse victim out of a window, and chokes out her husband. Death by reenactment of Deer Hunter Russian roulette scene, man scolded by soup. Two sex workers petting a dog. Old mustachioed man in a nappy or diaper in a cot smoking a cigarette. Gratuitous Michael J. Pollard. Gratuitous Sidney Lassick. Gratuitous Sarah Douglas. Gratuitous use of Wings Hauser song on the soundtrack. Psycho-inspired death scene intercut with our heroes in an excessively soapy bath having oral sex. A villain called Latin Jerry saying the line, "You don't think if I kill this dick they won't put another dick on my case and up my ass?" Death by chainsaw, inspired by Scarface. Death by hanging. Knife through the hand and strangulation. A foot chase scored with a series of maddening jazzes like a discordant Benny Hill sequence. Hauser in a deck chair feeding a bunny rabbit booze on the beach. Kinmont and Gary Wernz, the villain, fighting in a house, rolling around a lot before rolling down a hill. Bad guy shot in the neck but keeps running. Foot chase up to the roof. Bad guy shouting, "Stop shooting me," not "stop shooting at me," but just "stop shooting me." And Hauser kicks the bad guy off the roof onto Rudolph Valentino's star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. And as he kisses his woman, a man in nothing but a pink Speedo up his butt roller skates past them and the saxophone starts to wail. While those bullet points might not contain the usual car stunts and explosions, they are nonetheless some of the greatest you might ever hear on this podcast. Well, first of all, Adam, actually, let's do this. Give us the elevator pitch. We're going up to the 22nd floor, and you've got to tell someone what happens in this movie in a couple of minutes' time.
Imagine if 8mm never had someone dwelling on the disgustingness of it. When you're to pitch that this villain is basically a snuff filmmaker and a cop who's really just working on a hangover is the one who's got to deal with this, and you constantly forget just how heinous and how sleazy this film is. No matter how many times it tries to remind you, you're just watching the lead going, where's he going to go next? Is he going to go off to some other mission? But then are constantly reminded of just how dark and how seedy this is. It the worst prostitution street in LA? It is the worst prostitution street in New York? No, it's both at the same time.
Yes.
But still, our hero is charming and just working his way through until he has some of the most awkward sex scenes he's ever had.
Yes, indeed. That's exactly what it is. But you've got to imagine it also as, I call this movie and in fact his other directorial movie, Living to Die, that he did, a collection of maddening jazzes, because the movie veers so wildly, but also at this odd leisurely pace. Like it'll throw, like each scene, no scene kind of matches the next scene. Yeah. 1 minute it'll be a love scene, the next minute it'll be a violent scene, the next minute it'll be a comic scene, then there's a chase scene, and none of the scenes really kind of flow delicately into each other, but they're all enhanced. Both, and the reason why I brought up the score in the introduction is they're sort of enhanced by the music of the movie, which Wings also weirdly seems in tune with. His ups and downs sort of match the maddening jazzes that we get on the soundtrack. And if this was made by like a notorious art house filmmaker, then it would be praised to this day as I think a weird exploration of the dark side and also the confused side of masculinity in a weird way. Like people would ponder over this movie if it was made by, one of the kind of 70s New York art house set. You know what I mean? If Andy Warhol and his factory had sort of somehow, pumped this out in the 70s, starring a bunch of, starring like a very young De Niro, or like Brian De Palma, when Brian De Palma and De Niro were making their like little independent films in high rises in Manhattan. If they had made something like this, it would be pondered and thought about from all time as sort of a deep, weird, comical, mad, violent, sexy exploration of like one man's just confusion with the world that he finds himself in. And yet it's all done through the eyes of, as we talk about, a PM Entertainment movie. So what's funny about this film is that throughout the movie, it keeps trying to be a PM Entertainment film. And Wings Hauser keeps going, no, we're not going to do that. I'm going to lie on a deck chair and force feed my bunny rabbit, which doesn't appear in any other scene, alcohol, while Kathleen Kinmont rides about on a horse.
Yeah.
This is just going to happen, and you're going to have to deal with it. Meanwhile, they're over there going, "Oh, we got to put a foot chase and a car crash in here at some point." So I find this movie endlessly fascinating. I don't know what take we're going to kind of come at it from, but I feel like whatever angle you approach this movie on, it's going to upturn your expectations.
I feel like the biggest part for me that sort of explains the sex and sexuality and lack of at the same time is how Wings can be in this world that's constantly about sex and sexuality, like about people's different identities in there. There's a scene where he'll say a bunch of things that is very questionable about sexuality in general, but he seems to not be aware, and that's not his problem. How a movie can be that sexual and then the next scene can just sort of wipe it off like it wasn't there so that they can be ready to just do it again in the next scene.
Right. I mean, in one of the most sort of, I think it's both a very obvious juxtaposition, but at the same time, I can't think of another movie where I've seen it done this well. And if like, and De Palma, if De Palma ever watched this movie, De Palma would be like screaming at the TV, being like, "Why didn't I think to do this?" There are two men, one of whom's a filmmaker and one of whom is sort of his pimp friend who goes out and finds young girls.
The great name Latin Jerry.
Latin Jerry. Both of whom are in a relationship with each other. They're clearly lovers or at least in love with each other. And in fact, the leading guy, the filmmaker, says as much towards the end of the movie. Latin Jerry goes out, finds girls on the street, brings them back. They reenact scenes from other movies. And then there's some others that are not really based on anything, where they just hang women upside down.
Yeah, the random hanging, which is maybe one of the darkest things, because that scene pays no connection to anything else in the film. It's just another excuse to see him with a camera acting like an auteur watching a death scene, which feels like it's out of a shot on video violence movie. And again, just leads to the amp up. It's about, I don't know, 3/4 into the film, so it needs to amp up that he is creepy and he is evil. So we don't feel for him, which again we'll get into because it's sort of a spoiler getting to the end. It's weird how maybe they're hinting to the relationship between the two villainous characters, but then they just say it so that you don't worry about it anymore. Well, it feels like an interesting way to handle it.
Yeah, there's also an interesting thing. And let me just finish, because I was building up to. So there is a scene in the movie where the filmmaker is killing a woman in the shower. Imagine the most grindhouseian exploitation version of what Hitchcock could ever have imagined. That is then very obviously juxtaposed with a wild Kathleen Kinmont orgasm as Wings Hauser pleasures her orally in a bathtub, which is the most polite way I can put that, I suppose. And
I've got completely out of shot for that whole thing. So
yes. And let's not forget, like Paul Volk, who edited this, definitely had a hand in this particular sequence, which is by far the standout. It's both the most bizarre and by far the standout kind of sequence in the center of this movie. Obviously, we see Kathleen Kinmont sit up on the edge of the bathtub. She says, "Now it's my 30 minutes or whatever." We'll get into their sexual relationship in a minute. But she goes, "It's now 30 minutes to do whatever I want. So you've got to go downtown." And we just see Wings' head kind of disappear between her legs. They cut back and forth between her orgasm and the death throes of the woman in the bathtub. So that I just wanted to kind of explain that sequence. But going back to what you were saying about the villains, what is, and also about the sexuality in the film, is what's very interesting is the sex scene that culminates with that bathtub scene, but starts way earlier. It's like a whole it's like the second act of the movie is just them having sex intercut with whatever the villain's getting up to, because they apparently spend the whole day doing it. The scene in the kitchen couldn't be like less erotic if it tried.
Yeah.
It is so jarringly unerotic and unloving, despite the fact that as the movie goes on, we're meant to believe a great love affair is unfolded between these two relative strangers. Kathleen Kinmont and him are strangers who have met, who are hooking up repeatedly, but they don't know much about each other. And when you look at that compared to the scene where the film director shows Latin Jerry's having a terrible time because they've stuck his picture up all over town and he can't go anywhere and he's all upset and he's stressed out and he's worried he's going to get arrested. And they're sitting watching as much of the film that the director's edited together. And he goes, I don't normally show my work until it's finished, but you're in a bad mood, so let me show it to you. And they both sit there. It's a really like touching scene in a really weird way. They both sit there lit up by the glow of the film projector, and it just slowly zooms into their face. And as they're watching it, you can tell they are both so in love with the film they are producing. They're so amazed that they're able to create this art. And then they just touch hands. Latin Jerry's hand comes down over his shoulder, and he just reaches up and touches Latin Jerry's hand. And it's this weirdly poignant artistic moment, because as filmmakers, you and I can relate to that. Like, we can relate to putting on a film that we know no one else cares as much about as we do, but that we will bask in the glow of in our own quiet little room and think to ourselves, I've done something of that makes me feel good. I can relate to that scene a lot, and yet it is these two murderers watching a snuff movie, yet the way it's filmed is way more loving and romantic than anything that happens between Kinmont and Hauser. It's weird, right?
It's probably one of the biggest tension moments of the film, when the two of them are semi-consoling each other as will they get caught as being killers.
Right.
It also slightly shows which one of them is in charge, as the filmmaker himself is the true kind of more evil of the two. But when they touch each other as they're watching it, I'm also worried for Latin Jerry at that point, because I think that his partner is going to kill him at that point. I'm just sort of waiting for him to like pull out a wire and garrote him or something.
Oh, okay.
And like as if he's like tricking him with the emotion, because of how psychotic he is to the rest of it. It's
right.
So misleading that he's showing emotion in that scene, which the fact that it stays just as emotion is also a kind of an interesting trick, because you could think it either way.
Right.
Either way, you're waiting for something to happen, and the lack of something happening there is actually probably a good thing, because it leads you confused about where do these characters stand and what's about to happen next to them.
Oh, that's really interesting that you watched it that way, and I totally see how you could see it that way, that you're like, oh, is Latin Jerry next? As the director, whose name is Roscoe, played by Gary Werns, is Roscoe going to off Latin Jerry because he's become a liability? That's
it's the leaning behind him.
Yes.
At least you would think, is it because of how kind of just sort of stoic faced and creepy he is? Is he leering or is he holding him?
Yes.
It leads you to make your own direction on that. But as you said, I could see it either way.
No, definitely. I think what I watched this again last night, and I think what I loved about it was the fact that there's, these two actors, Mitch Hara and Gary Werns. They convey on their faces, to me anyway, they convey on their faces the look that I would have when I watch something that I've either been in or I've made, or the look that I would have when I'm listening to a song that I'm quietly proud of. I'm never openly like, yeah, I did a great thing, but there's always like a little, when I do something that's just ever so slightly better than what I normally do, which is normally fairly rough around the edges, there's that little bit of me that just kind of goes, oh, that's nice. And they kind of conveyed that in a way to me. And I it's odd that you feel like a kind of sweetness towards these guys,
right?
Who
Either
are
way,
horrible fucking murderers. I mean, the murder scenes are not pleasant. They don't shy away from gore and violence and extremities at all.
And the fact that they're finding some sort of emotional connection by watching that terribleness makes it even worse. It borderlines on if someone said, "Oh, what if George C. Scott was just sitting in that theater and he just stared for a longer time at the screen and then said, oh, she's doing a good job."
Oh,
the film ended that way.
So yes, it's also one of those things where, I think a lot of people would write Wings Hauser off as sort of one of those 70s, 80s, 90s guys who are a little problematic with their opinions. What's interesting about Wings Hauser is that the more you learn about it, the more you discover about it, the more you whatever, is that actually, while he brings it up a lot in his films, in this movie, he has a comment about like, well, maybe I'll go gay then. He says to Kinmont, maybe I'll go gay and I'll become a traffic cop and I'll fill out tickets with my little pink pen, which I think is such a wonderful, like, ridiculous rant to go on. He's just going on this rant.
That being the scene where she rides away on a horse.
Right, yeah. She shows up on a horse out of nowhere, yes.
Yeah. Pulls out the handcuffs and he says, "Oh, handcuffs? Can't we just have sex like straight people?" Which maybe that was supposed to be in their mind that, oh, that's a hint towards the villains. We got to mention homosexuality because no one would have seen that coming. No one else but us are progressive.
Yeah, no, and I think, but it's interesting because I don't think Wings, again, there's a lot of like sexism in the movie to some extent because he's sort of rambling about women. But first of all, if you've ever heard him interviewed, and also if you've seen any of the other movies that he's done, and also some of the movies that he would then later on in life try and make, there were some movies that he tried to make that he never got off the ground or whatever. And even a couple that he made after he directed PM Entertainment. All of them actually tend to be fairly socially aware in a weird way. I'm not going to say that he's not rough around the edges and that he doesn't have that 70s, 80s mentality completely, because there is part of that. But what's interesting about his sort of rants that he goes on in The Art of Dying, and indeed the sort of the Kathleen Kinmont relationship push and pull that goes throughout the movie, where he's wrestling with the idea of, like, I really like this woman, but she just keeps showing up. We have this torrid affair, and then she leaves. And am I jealous that she might be with another guy? Is she with another guy? Like, she tells him that the horse that she borrowed is actually from a dude down the street. We only find out at the very end of the movie that actually she just rented the horse, which is almost more bizarre. I don't like the idea that Kathleen Kinmont has just been going along beachfront properties and sleeping with guys and borrowing horses makes almost more sense than her renting a horse just to show up at Hauser's beachfront property. But okay.
There's a level where she seems like, and I think my brain thought this the very first time I saw it, because the first time we meet or they meet each other, I don't really know if they're acting or not. It sounds like they've met maybe and done this before, and this is role play because they're threatening each other. So, but if you were to tell me that no, that legitimately that first scene where she shows up at his house and is holding him up is real, I would still believe it because it doesn't make any more or less sense than their whole relationship, where part of it feels like she's a figment of his imagination because she never interacts with, until very later on, does she interact with anyone else. It almost feels like this is his weird drunken escape into his house with this mystery woman who he admits he does not know. We discover he knows nothing about her. Yeah. And when she does tell who she is, that could also be a lie because none of it really matters to him. He laughs it off. Yeah. He just goes with it, grumbles a little bit because he's grumbly Wings, and then just still jumps into bed anyway. But
it's what I mean. It's sort of what's interesting about this movie is outside, like, it keeps trying to be a serial killer movie and it keeps trying to be a detective movie. But I think the movie that Wings wants to make is a very personal, self-exploratory kind of movie, where he's constantly at odds with everything. He's at odds with what the 90s are going to be. Like, he keeps talking about, like, if this is going to be the 90s, like, what the hell, he's at odds with this.
Life was rough enough for men in the 60s and 70s. I hate to see what's going to happen to men in the 90s, I think is his one quote. As many drunken sitting on the beach scenes.
You have this somewhat like progressive, sexually adventurous woman who sees past all his faults and tries to explain that her sexual adventurousness can also be seen as romantic, even though he's resisting it and only seeing it as its sexual design kind of thing. So there's all this, like he's trying to figure out like she does role play at the beginning, then she's talking about sex toys and handcuffs and things like that. But then at the same time, they have this weird argument in the middle of the movie where he's bought her a lovely nightgown. She comes in wearing this sexy nightgown, says, look at me, look at me. He, because he's going through some paperwork on his bed or whatever and smoking cigarettes and things, it's just like, oh, I don't have time for this right now. She then gets mad that he bought her the nightgown, even though she came walking in dressed in it. She then says something along the lines of like, well, sex toys and negligee is not, romantic, even though she's the one that's been pushing the sexual progressiveness of the relationship. He then says, what do you want, chocolates? And she's like, candy would be nice. And then he's like, I suppose flowers as well then. And she's like, long stem. No, roses, I suppose. And she's like, long stem. Yeah. So it's this weird, interesting thing where he's trying to tell this. There's almost this Chasing Amy style story throughout the middle of the movie. The original Chasing Amy story, because Kevin Smith wrote it about a lesbian, but the original story was that he was a naive man dating a sexual adventurous woman and couldn't keep up. That's what Kevin Smith based the original story on. And it's interesting that sort of the Wings Hauser Kathleen Kinmont thing is like, she wants a romantic relationship, but she's also like sex positive and sex forward and sex progressive. He wants a romantic relationship, but he's also a drunken cop on the edge who doesn't want to be held down or whatever. And there's this fascinating like push and pull throughout the whole movie that is almost an entirely other movie. It's got nothing to do with the serial killing that's going on. It's got nothing to do with any of the detective work or lack thereof that he does, because all his detective work is either done by Michael Pollard or is just incredibly fortuitous. He just trips over Latin Jerry at a restaurant one evening, throws soup on him. Like, it's just, all of it is sort of very slapdash. And like I say, it's very important to me that the score not be missed at all, because I feel that, like jazz and like Wings' propensity for improvisation, I feel that this movie, because he is the director, because he did improv a lot of scenes, because, as I say, there's this like, they're trying to make it a PM movie and Wings is trying to make it this kind of experimental jazz movie. There is, I think that there's do you know what I mean? There's a connection there with sort of the musicality of the movie and the randomness of the scenes. I don't know whether I'm being too pretentious about it, but I kind of want to be. I kind of want to give Wings his artistic due. Do you know what I mean?
Well, because it's playing off old stereotype characters of the smoking gun drunken cop with the vamp woman who comes into the office and it's all mysterious, except that then it lets these characters live out a life that they wouldn't have in those films, because the scenes that he has with her are so big that, as you said, it could be its own story in its own, because so little of their scenes and their relationship actually affect anybody else in that film, that if in that scene, that's the petty argument about the flowers and the candy. That seems like he's just taken from an argument he had at home and then put it into the film, because it feels like there's so many more dimensions to their relationship, but again, does not really affect the rest of the main plot, because it felt like he was writing something else. But there's also, good or bad if you like it, there's so many throwaway characters, which is where I feel like you're witnessing a man who has separated himself from reality, because he walks in and out of these people's lives, and in so little of what happens to them. Near the very end, when he realizes this woman that he has been telling himself, I'm just a man, I'm just having sex with her, and no, I love her. That's his twist, I guess, to himself. That's the one true emotion that he kind of has. He does get very upset because of the young girl that he wants to help when she falls victim to all of this. But I feel like as a setup, I wonder how first writing drafts for things like these go, because he's introduced to so many actually good characters, but it doesn't affect him until sort of the end. His partner that he has at the beginning, they seem like they could have been a whole film together.
Oh, I would have loved that. Yeah, they're great together. Yeah.
He's much more upbeat. So I think the first time I saw at the beginning of it, he's very like witty and into it. And when a terrible thing happens, he still jokes it off like an 80s cartoon hero.
Right.
But then, so my thought when I first saw that, I thought the accident that happens at the beginning of the film with his old partner, who sadly we have no reason to see again, which is too bad because she's
Amazing.
so good.
Yeah.
And then, but what happens in that scene, where he accidentally kills somebody
Well,
in a
he
scene
throws, let's be very clear. They go, we can go back to the beginning of the movie for a minute to talk about this because it's again, this adds another layer of fascination to the movie that we haven't even got to yet, which is sort of the police characters or whatever they are. The Michael Pollard, Sarah Douglas, and his partner at the beginning, who you said was played by Mary Bond Davis, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
As Jessie.
Yeah.
So, and where I sort of think that, the PM Entertainment movie that otherwise would have been made is, you're right, the cop on the edge, has an accident at the beginning of it that he can't quite reconcile. Because of that, he desperately tries to save everyone he comes across. He fails to save some women who are murdered by this serial killer. He goes after the serial killer. There's some action sequences. The end. Like that's the movie it's trying to make. And maybe along the way he has a girlfriend who he has sex with, but so they can get some boobs in the movie. But essentially, that's the movie they're trying to make. And Wings is like, all right, I'm gonna film noir it up a bit. You know what I mean? I'm gonna like certainly the opening of this movie with the saxophones and the shots over LA and whatever could quite easily be in black and white. You know what I mean? Like they could quite easily sort of be in this. But there are some things in the opening that I absolutely adore. First of all, the old 80s and 90s trope that we just accept at this point. You're cool if you can't park your car properly. If you just pull up and just leave your car wherever it is, just I'm not going to bother parallel parking this. We haven't got time for that. I got to get out and I got to throw people out of windows and eat hot dogs. You know what I mean? So he just pulls the car in, leaves half of it on the boulevard, the other half in the parking space. I love that. I'm too cool to park the car properly. And then they're on their way to this domestic abuse thing. We see this apartment where people are like bitching and moaning out of the windows and throwing glasses of water over each other and generally just being crazy. He goes, fuck this. I'm going to get myself a hot dog while I have like a back and forth about sex. The whole opening conversation is about sex between him and Mary Davis, who's sort of saying, not only, there's another one. She is a sexually progressive woman. She openly admits she like fucked the football team and was perfectly comfortable with doing so, et cetera, right? Like she's very like, yeah, I'm not there's no slut shaming in this movie. Everyone's very like sex positive except Wings Hauser. But they're talking about this. She's saying, you just need to get laid. You just need to get this. And there's no hint from him that he's going to tell his partner about Kinmont. And when we meet Kinmont later, he does say she's back. So there is an implication that maybe they've done this before. You know what I mean? Right. So he doesn't mention her to her partner. Like you say, this opening scene could be from a totally different Wings Hauser movie. They go up into the apartment building. We see an apartment in disarray with a big brutish guy screaming at a woman and a woman screaming at him back. Wings comes in, again, being fairly benevolent, being like, oh, you shouldn't hit women and you should treat women with respect. He's trying to be all nice and everything else. The next thing I know, everyone's throwing each other against walls. Like everyone's just fighting each other in this apartment. The big guy literally picks Wings up widthways, which considering Wings is, 6'3" or something like that? It's pretty impressive. Throws him or his stuntman against the wall. And in the kerfuffle, so essentially the partner is trying to arrest. Oh no, is it that Wings is beating up the brutish guy? The wife goes, don't you beat up on my man, runs at him with a knife and accidentally stabs.
Oh, it's right after he gets thrown into the wall.
Right.
Wings is down.
Yeah.
So she runs in.
The partner runs in, right.
In, and it looks like she's grabbing him by the nuts or something.
Yeah.
Because the big guy's screaming as the woman partner pins him against the wall. We can only assume what she's doing. And out of nowhere, the abused wife stabs the female cop because she's like, reaction, you can't hurt my white trash husband.
Right.
Even that she was seconds ago saying, I'm going to see you burn.
Right.
And that's when Wings jumps in, grabs her, gravity gives up. Because that man has already picked up and thrown Wings, which seems impossible.
Yes.
And then by Wings basically grabbing her by the shirt and throwing her to the side. She then turns right in the air and goes straight
and flies
out the
straight
window.
through a window. Yeah, it's completely bizarre because, as I say, he came to break up an abuse victim. He says you shouldn't hurt women. The woman then goes insane. And look, this comes, we've all seen this on Jerry Springer or one of those shows where like 1 minute they're fighting and the next minute they're crying and making up and whatever. It's sort of a usual kind of cycle of abuse that tends to go back and forth between men and women. So it's not unrealistic that she would be mad when she saw her abusive husband being beaten up. But I don't know that you would run at someone with a knife. But all right, it's a PM film, so she runs at the person with a knife, stabs the partner.
Heat of the moment.
Yeah, heat of the moment. And Wings, like you say, I don't even think he grabs her eye. He like grabs her shirt, like her shirt, and then he just like flings her shirt back. She goes running off the screen, and the next thing we see is a shot outside the apartment building and her flying through the window and sailing through the air.
Straight Superman pose, straight out the window.
Yeah, and it's one of those things. There's great moments in PM entertainment films where people just sort of run through windows, and you're like, that's not really how. Even thin windows, you know what I mean? Like they would stop you. You wouldn't. I mean, you might break them, but you wouldn't fly through them as if they didn't exist. You know what I mean? As if they weren't there.
Unless Wings has the power of Superman.
He does.
Like that, which obviously he does for that fleeting moment in the film.
For that sequence. And I presume arrests the other guy.
After putting him in some big sleeper hold like a wrestler.
Yes. Yeah, he chokes him out and then they squirrel away his partner and we never see her again, which is I think if there was one big shame about this film, it's that. I would have liked more of her. As it is, what we get back at the police station, and I know you wanted to talk about this, so I'm happy to tee it up and hand it over to you. But we get Sarah Douglas and Michael J. Pollard. Sarah Douglas, who is doing what exactly in the police station? What is her role?
She's sort of kind of as if she's his superior, but there's someone else to be a superior to yell at him later. Where she exactly fits in there, I'm not 100% sure, but she is, as we mentioned earlier, that needed character that can come in and say, but he's a good cop. His records show, no matter what terrible things he's done consistently through this movie.
Right. What's weird is she's almost, the blonde woman in Lethal Weapon who's in loads of Richard Donner movies, and I'm sorry I don't know her name, but she shows up all the time and to go like, Riggs, you need more help or whatever. She's like the police psychiatrist or whatever.
And the mom for both Goonies and Monster Squad.
Yes,
she's the same character in those movies. Yeah,
that woman. She's fantastic, by the way. I just wish I knew her name, but she's in tons of stuff.
Yeah.
Sarah Douglas in this movie is like the opposite of her. So she's like the woman in the police precinct who actually really likes Hauser. In fact, they even have like a flirty back and forth. You even imagine that like if Kinmont sort of dumped his ass, he'd be like, oh, it's all right. So, even though she's married, they're kind of doing a lot of like, maybe we'll go out for dinner and back at your place and all this sort of stuff.
Which is an interesting thing because it sets up that there is a backstory. Right. His first partner that we see, even that we don't get into it, they have a relationship of some sort. So they've obviously done this before. They know each other. They're comfortable with each other. He knows her. They have some sort of past. Maybe at one point she was at the same sort of level that he was or whatever. Who knows? It doesn't matter. It's just to show that he's a real person with real relationships, no matter how terrible he is with relationships.
It also feels, and this happens a little bit in the beginning of Maximum Force as well, where they kind of crowbar Mickey Rooney into the movie. It does feel like, we've got Pollard, we've got Sarah Douglas, we can get them. Let's get them and put them in this film and just like figure it out. You know what I mean? I don't feel like Sarah Douglas's character is hugely fleshed out.
No, she's definitely there to just fill that role that's needed.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think like where her career goes. As a B-movie fan, she has a great list of it, other than being the sexy villain in Superman 2.
Right.
I mean, she's in Puppet Master 3 and Return of the Living Dead 3. So she's already like a B genre actress, but she obviously has some sort of a little bit more Hollywood quality than some of those people that she's worked with.
No, true. And she does. What's interesting is that this is not the last time she works with PM. She does show up on an episode of LA Heat, which would be their TV series. She is an English actor, so she does spend her time between B movies and TV series in America. But she spends her time between doing that very kind of glamorous American work to then winding up in things like Emmerdale Farm, which is a up north British soap opera where a lot of people sit around and talk about churning butter or whatever it is they talk.
Ailing cows.
Yeah, she's also in Holby City, which is sort of the British version of ER, which is as cheap and ridiculous as that sounds. She did a lot of part 3s. She's in Chained Heat Part 3.
Oh right, yeah.
Hell Mountain. Because of course there's a Chained Heat Part 3. Why wouldn't there be?
It's not like it has to connect. It's there's so many movies that are sort of Chained Heat, so what does it matter?
Oh, and do you know who else is in Chained Heat Part 3? I might have to watch this movie. Jack Scalia is in Chained Heat Part 3, where PM worlds collide.
Yeah. Again, one of those things where some casting agency must be the same person. They must be on someone's same Rolodex.
Yeah. And what about Michael J. Pollard? I mean, what a weird career that gentleman's had. And what a generally bizarre... Like, if there was going to be a documentary about someone, I would love to watch a Michael J. Pollard documentary, because I have no idea if that's really him, if that's just the performance he always puts in movies. What's with Pollard? Because he's a little out there.
And he's never really that different. And
Right.
Am I just mistaking mixed characters, or is he not also one of the lackeys in Hologram Man?
I don't know if he's in Hologram Man.
It's
He
just
shows
another
up
one
in-
with another scientist has another lackey beside him, and he's just like, oh, I'll do it. He's kind of like almost an Igor in a lot of things.
Yes, he is the Q in the third act of Tango and Cash. He's the
Right.
one that builds
Yes. the crazy car that
thing
yeah.
that attacks the once Tango and Cash just goes in the third act, just goes completely off the rails, and Sylvester Stallone is just writing whatever gobbledygook comes into his mind. He's like, well, of course I'm gonna have a special car with a mounted gun on it, and we're gonna attack Jack Palance, who has a maze full of mice. Like, what is going on in that movie? But anyway.
when he's no longer taking scenes from the first Police Story film.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But
not that I don't love Tango and Cash, I do, but
right. But no, yeah, he's known for Bonnie and Clyde, Tango and Cash, Scrooged,
yeah,
and House of a Thousand Corpses. Those are the ones that sort of are Pollard's big four, according to
as well as I
IMDb.
believe also the voice of the lackey of the main villain in Toxic Crusaders, the Toxic Avengers kids TV show.
He plays Psycho.
Right. And he
Yes.
just always sort of tells you the plot randomly in the middle of the movie in case you forgot. Okay, in every episode.
Oh, he's in Split Second as well. He's in Split Second for a moment with Rutger Hauer, another favorite B movie of mine.
And he is at the same point kind of a guy who could easily be mixed with a bunch of other slightly character actors of that time, which is why I'm trying to think, who's the guy with the creepy belt buckle in Sleepaway Camp 3?
That is also him.
Right. Okay.
That's him.
It's him having a scene where he's trying to be sexual with a young woman in that scene is probably one of the most uncomfortable things you'll ever see.
It is. And if you've watched Sleepaway Camp 1, you can't imagine it getting more uncomfortable. But Sleepaway Camp 3 is like, oh, we're just going to throw Pollard in there and he's going to try and have sex with a child. Yeah. Well, not a child, teenager.
Yes.
A teenager. But I mean, listen, I'm in my mid-40s. Anyone under 30 is a child.
Right, yeah. Either way, it was creepy. And he had, I just remember he had a hologram cowboy belt buckle, and he's like, you want to see where the cowboy goes? It's something really creepy.
Yeah. But I quite liked after the second one, which is really just where Bruce Springsteen's sister just kind of kills people in a row.
Right.
I quite liked that the third one tried to bring back some of the uncomfortable nature of part one.
Yeah. Oh, I'm actually quite a fan of that one. And wish Pamela Springsteen did more things. She's only done a couple of fun stuff, but she She had chops.
She did have chops. She really did have chops, and she went back to just she just photographs his tours now, doesn't she? Doesn't she do a lot of photographing? But yeah, she's a photographer behind the scenes of Springsteen's tour. But yeah, so these are our character actors that we got to work with: Sarah Douglas, Michael J. Pollard, and in a cameo, someone else everyone will recognize, Sidney Lassick, who is actually singing along to a jukebox, playing a Wings Hauser song.
That was like, I knew there was one in there.
Yes.
It does feel like this movie needs Neon Slime in it. Like, I feel like it's great that it has this Lethal Weapon-esque sexy saxophone complete sound and score with this, and at the end it just blasts it. But I feel even if it all of a sudden just replaced it with Wings Hauser's Neon Slime, it would still so fit at the end of this movie.
Of course. I mean, I just want to see a Wings Hauser song in every single, like, I wish he'd written The Art of Dying, the song. Right. So that as the end credits played, it was just him singing about, the art of dying, or so, some kind of ridiculous thing.
Semi-referencing the plot, conceptual song. Yeah.
Yes. And then out of nowhere, I poured milk all over her.
Right. That'd be worse if that's where his song was playing. Like, which is connecting to another Wings Hauser film, Get Even, or whatever 3,000 titles you want to call it, where the guy who made that, he sings over his own sex scenes in that film, and luckily Wings gets to lay in a hospital bed through most of that movie.
Nice.
But so my thought was just how steal away the sex scenes are in Art of Dying if all of a sudden you heard Wings singing over those scenes when he's pouring milk on her.
Yes,
we've made that clear, people. There is a scene where randomly, you just mentioned it earlier as being the most unsexy sex scene, where she tears his shirt and then he gets a giant jug of milk and pours it on her and then hoses her down in the sink.
Yes. There's the windowsill in the kitchen and he's got the jam there and the milk there. It's not like the milk's in the fridge and
what was it doing there then?
Right. And not only that, but he has one of those hose extenders on the sink specifically set up so that he can hose it down. So we'll play a little bit with food and a little bit with milk. He pours it over her head.
As a Canadian, it's very weird because that's a huge 3-liter jug of milk. Yes. And we get ours in bags and we have to put them in a little holder. Right. So if it wasn't already ready to go, imagine the preparation. He's like, hang on, honey, let me put the bag in. Let me cut the top off. All right, now let me pour it over you.
Right. Well, what I like is that someone somewhere went, well, let's do that 9.5 weeks thing. But instead of trying to figure out actually how to do the 9.5 weeks thing sexually, he just went, what have we got in the fridge? Jam and milk? Oh, that'll do. I'll smear a bit of that on her lips. I'll pour, we'll drink a little bit of the milk and then I'll just playfully pour it everywhere. It would be fine. It would be fine if it didn't pan down past Wings' ass to show his feet, like standing in this tepid pool of milk, water, and jam that just, that turns my stomach. So in the middle of this sex scene, to pan down to the floor where you've got like dirt, debris, jam, milk, water, all curdling around Wings's Bigfoot feet. It's a little off-putting.
You can imagine someone, because right after that, then they go into the bathtub, and someone's saying, "Oh, well, that's the reason why." Right. Because otherwise, the audience will think, "Why don't they just continue doing what they were doing there? Why did they have to go to the bathtub?" Well, it's because they were covered in milk and it's gross.
Well, and also because she has that thing where she's like, "You can do whatever you want to me here, but then I get 30 minutes of you doing whatever I want in the bathroom." And
their consistent power play game.
Yeah, and what's funny is even the bathroom scene, which is by far the sexier of the two scenes,
it's not hard.
Right, not hard. So bothers me because she sits up out of the bath. She's covered in bubble bath, right? Which, if you're going to be doing sex stuff in a bathtub, bubble bath, not good. No one wants to be eating soap. Do you know what I mean? And if she's covered in bubble bath and just sits up, it's not like she rinses herself off. Let's just put it that way.
Right.
So if he's doing what he's doing with his mouth, isn't he just part of it quaffing huge amounts of soap? I'm just saying.
That's just movie magic. That's the fact that she doesn't get on the edge of the bathtub and just slide off and fly away. Like,
right.
Nature doesn't work like movies do. Even Wings seems to have some decent moves at this point, I guess.
Right.
As much as, again, uncomfortable that scene is, because it then splices back and forth to a rather cartoonish but horrid murder.
Yeah.
So it really can take you out of it. But that is the point, I guess.
And some borderline, and I understand the actor is older, but also like borderline teenage nudity. She's not teenage, the actor is older, but she's meant to be 16, 17 in the film. And she's in the shower and, so I don't know.
And you've already seen her in terrible positions when Wings goes to kind of free her and get her out of the bad life she's in when it's still Janet.
Yes. So I'm glad you brought that up, because I wanted, there's a great moment in there that sort of the Taxi Driver, or if you're British, like the Mona Lisa scene, where he goes into the back rooms of a sex phone line shop kind of place, where a guy gets
cartoon brothel,
where a guy gets cut off. He's on the phone and then he gets cut off, and just like the scene begins with him just freaking out, being like, how dare you cut me off, or whatever. And then Wings comes in and he walks through. They clearly can't afford to do like a full-blown, like, I think he wants to do his, the seedy underbelly of LA thing, but he walks past a room with 2 sex workers petting a dog.
Right.
Which is just weird. An old guy with a mustache wearing a diaper in a giant crib, and I know like baby play or whatever is a thing, but
he's by himself.
He's by himself smoking a cigarette with an old
looking like the baby from the Roger Rabbit cartoons.
I mean, not even. I mean, looking like the Pa from Beverly Hillbilly.
Right. Yeah.
Mixed with the baby from, because he's this sort of scrawny, spindly, weird-looking old gray guy, and then he goes into the back room where there's all this sort of, sexual accoutrement, and she's just standing with her back to the wall, or with her
front
face
to the wall,
and her butt showing while someone is whipping her, right?
Yeah, and he just says, "Get out of here," and then says, like, what are you doing here? I thought you were gonna leave. She's like, "Oh, I needed some money," and she's all like, "Meh," like no big deal.
Yeah, I needed some money, so I went to the, like, if you needed money, I don't know, you could have gone anywhere in LA and gone, "Can I work behind the counter for a few hours?" You know what I mean? Or get a job at Dunkin' Donuts or something.
Which then connects to her weirdness of, like, it's not like they're alluding that she's addicted to that lifestyle, but it feels like she doesn't know anything other than that lifestyle.
Right.
Because then when she is at that diner to go get the bus out of town with Sidney Lassick.
Yes.
Yeah, right. Who also is a guy who, no matter what role he's been in movies, is playing the same thing.
Yes.
And overdoing it. But
people will know him from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Carrie, Freeway, movies like that.
He's in and I hope I'm not getting this wrong. I think it's the same guy in the movie Silent Madness, and he's like a sheriff in the town. And like, who chose him to be a sheriff in a slasher movie? He's like, "I know better, kid. You're crazy. This killer wouldn't be here." But he's still doing it in his voice.
Yes,
which is
When was Silent Madness from? Yeah, from '84. Yeah, that is him. Yeah,
yeah. And it's so he's still talking and acting the same, but he's playing a character that in no way was written for him.
No,
but impressive. But regardless, she asks him if there's any dancing going on in that town. He goes, "Oh, you want to go to a dance and meet some boys?" She goes, "No, I mean like topless." And he's like, "Oh heavens!"
Yes.
And it comes out of nowhere in the conversation. It's so unnatural,
yes.
But it's to show that she has a problem. And then, of course, Latin Jerry shows up and we're back in trouble again.
Yes, because on one hand, the redheaded actor, she, wants to be a star and gets embroiled in, this sort of seedy place where she then ultimately gets killed. The blonde, on the other hand, like, as you're saying, seemingly can't help us. Like, she sees her only avenue of money being sex work.
Yeah, the redheadish one who's the innocent one who was when we first meet.
Yes,
Jerry. She goes by the name of Summer, but she alludes it's not her real name. And she seems like the innocent starlet who's come to the big city and is lost by it. But Janet, who at one point Wings again predominantly tries to save and say, get out of town, take some money and get on a bus and get out of here or something. She seems like the classic story of I was raised on the streets kind of thing. Right. But which again is interesting because we don't get told that one way or the other, but just by simple hints, we get an idea that these characters, this isn't new for them. No,
we get told something about her parents. Didn't he say her parents want to talk to you or something like that?
She's like, she's a runaway or something like that.
Yeah. I think that gets mentioned. All right, well, I hope you're enjoying the show so far. It's a good one, right? There's lots going on in this episode. Anyway, we now have a ton of interview clips. The first few clips are from conversations I had with Joseph Merhi, Rick Pepin, and Paul Volk, where they mention Wings Hauser. So I'm just playing a couple of those clips as sort of a tribute from them. And then I conducted new interviews with both Wings Hauser's biographer and documentarian, Steve Mitchell. For people who don't know, Steve Mitchell made the fantastic Larry Cohen documentary, King Cohen, and has now made a new documentary called Working Class Actor, which he's been filming and editing over the last few years, where he had access to Wings before he passed, lots of footage of Wings, new interviews with him, as well as interviews with tons of people who worked with Wings. The trailer is online, so if you look up Working Class Actor, Wings Hauser trailer, you'll find it. But interviewed tons of people from Wings' career, as well as a lot of PM Entertainment cohorts and collaborators. So look for Working Class Actor when that comes out either later this year or early next. So I interviewed Steve, which was a fantastic conversation. And because we're talking Art of Dying and because I wanted one of Wings' co-stars from his PM films, we are incredibly honored to be talking to Kathleen Kinmont as well. So lots of interview coming up and lots of Wings tribute coming up. So I hope you're enjoying it and keep listening. Obviously, we will have a few commercials now before the interviews and maybe interspersed throughout the interviews. Apologies for that, but I do need to pay for hosting and pay for all my editing time and everything like that. So please listen to the commercials, fast forward them, whatever you want to do, and enjoy the interviews. And then we'll be back to finish up our discussion on the Art of Dying and wrap up the episode. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for continuing to be engaged on Facebook. Don't forget, if you like the shows, if you want more of them, rate and review, rate and review, rate and review. That is the biggest help you can do, and it costs absolutely nothing. Beyond that, the other help you can do is like, share, comment, tell your friends, tell your family, all that good stuff. Regram it, whatever the kids are doing these days. Share it to your Instagram stories, whatever it is. Please, I try and be around on social media just about every day, posting something, and you guys are incredibly responsive, which is fantastic. Just don't forget to share it to the outside world so we can get more listeners and more people engaged with this thing, because I'll take this wherever it'll go. If this gets a big listenership and it starts becoming a popular show, listen, more interviews, more podcasts, filmed segments, a documentary, who knows? So look, I'm willing to ride the PM Entertainment train all the way to the end of the line. So just keep supporting and we'll keep doing. All right, thanks so much, guys. Enjoy these interviews. Okay, first up, Joseph Merhi.
Wings Hauser, I just had dinner with Wings Hauser. They did a documentary on his life, which coming out. I think they spent $280,000.
Yeah, I know the director a little bit, Steve Mitchell. I interviewed him and Larry Cohen when they did the Larry Cohen documentary some years ago. I'm a big fan of Steve Mitchell. I'm so excited for the Wings Hauser documentary. I'm the biggest fan of Wings Hauser. I just find him such a such a curious, enigmatic, unique, different, weird, wonderful performer on screen. And I wanted to ask, actually, you made a few films with him, and he directed a couple as well. Can you speak a little bit about sort of the process of working with Wings Hauser?
Well, when I first saw Wings Hauser, I forget the name of the movie, but I was extremely impressed, and I thought he was a brilliant actor. He was really a good actor. So I don't know how the opportunity came so we can work with him. And so we worked with him, and he was he's an artist, and he was a little bit, this is not he was a little crazy, a little eccentric, but all actors are, who are really talented. So, and then to be honest, when Steve Mitchell called me and he told me to interview, I said, no, I have nothing to say about him. I said, I can't remember. He said, what do you mean you can't remember? I said, I can't even remember. I don't own one PM movie. I don't have anything, it's like a chapter in my life that was in the past. My kids watched one movie for the first time. I have 27, 25, and 22. And for Christmas, everybody was at home and said, Dad, we've never seen one of your movies. Can we see one of your movies? So we bought one on Prime and watched my movie. And they've never seen one of my movies. So, and they were impressed. They thought, oh, my God, that was really nice or whatever. But, I couldn't remember this. So they brought me the DVDs of the movie and said, please watch them. You will remember the stories and some stories. Since I watched them, Wings reached out to me and said hello. And so we had lunches 2-3 times, and he came to my house the other day for dinner.
Nice that the documentary brought you both back into each other's lives. And had you not seen him in a long time?
Have not seen him since I made the movie.
Oh, wow. Okay.
30 years ago. When we were shooting The Art of Dying, I think it was a scene where Kathleen Kinmont and Wings Hauser in a bathtub.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And they were kissing and they were romancing together.
Yeah.
And then we were shooting, and then we ran out of film. We're shooting on film, 35 millimeter film, and it takes about 10 minutes to change the magazine. They take the magazine out, they bring in the magazine, they blow air into the lenses and make sure everything. It takes 10 minutes to change. So we'll say we're out of film, so we stop, and at that point, Wendell Lawrence walks in to the set, and he is, by the craft service, maybe getting coffee, and his wife and Wings are in the bathtub.
Yeah.
And Wings is, touching her legs, and I said, we're not shooting, right? And Wings goes, we're just staying in character. I said, oh, okay. Her husband's standing out. Her husband is watching me. I was so embarrassed for.
When we all heard about Wings passing, I reached out to some of the PM Entertainment people, and Joseph responded and said, thank you. I always thought Wings was extremely talented. God bless his soul. And then the cinematographer, Ken Blakey, who I hope to be speaking to soon, said, I did not know about Wings passing. I'm very sorry to hear about that. I actually worked on Art of Dying as Rick Pepin's gaffer. I was just breaking in at PM. Rick and I always agreed that it was probably PM's best all-around film. Not an action or martial arts movie, but a solid dramatic film noir. Wings was a pleasure to work with. I look forward to speaking to you. Okay, and now a brief word with Rick Pepin.
I was open to anything, and it was like that with actors too. I mean, we like with Wings Hauser. I wanted him to make his movie, but I shot his movies because we were a little worried about his drinking and stuff, and
right.
But I was on set all the time, and I shot him. But I kind of let him do what he wanted to do, unless it was really crazy. But I had very few issues with him.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm, aside from being a PM Entertainment fan, I'm a huge fan of Wings Hauser's straight-to-video output. And I'm sort of aware of who he was a little bit behind the scenes, but mainly because some directors have spoken very highly of him, and other directors have. I think Nico Mastorakis, who made a series of low-budget films in the 80s and 90s, but worked with Hauser on The Wind and Nightmare at Noon, had not great things to say about him, but other people have said some fantastic things about him. And I'm a huge fan of what seems to be his somewhat unpredictable but kind of wild improv style. I mean, yes, obviously there are lines written for him and there is a script, but he also seems to be very good at taking that character and then sort of talking and or acting or even dropping little things in within that character. Is that something you found working with him?
Yeah. And again, I would let him do that. I used to tell people when they came in, and like PMs could give you this box and an X amount of money. The money would always change. Some of them were $500,000, some of them were, one. But I said, in this box, you can move the money around. You can do things. But I said, you can't get out of this box. And the box is like Corman. I mean, we had an opening action scene, a closing action scene, and it was every 10 minutes. Something has to happen. Something has to happen. So as long as you stayed in that box, you could kind of do what you want, because, it seemed to work for us. It seemed to work.
Definitely. And I mean, I've watched, I think, all of the Wings Hauser ones and everything but the big fall that C. Thomas Howell did for you. And what's interesting is they seem to be leaning into a lot of that film noir vibe. I mean, obviously with the sort of neon-drenched 80s and 90s sort of Los Angeles cinematography and sometimes Las Vegas cinematography, but it's the beats of the film outside of the action tend to be fairly kind of film noirish. Is that something they both spoke to you about, or is that something you guys brought to the table and said, hey, what can you actors do with this?
I think it was more Wings, and I went along with it. I was fine with it. I love film noir, so, I said, let's do it. And one of the things at the very beginning, Joe and I, when we went to the foreign markets, they just liked seeing shots of Los Angeles. Yeah. So we made sure we were on the streets all the time. And that was kind of, I'm not sure it's the same now, but I think in the 80s and 90s, they were really looking for seeing the city. And we shot everywhere in LA. So we gave them that. That was another staple that we really had to be down in Hollywood. We had to be downtown LA. We need to show them the city. So, and that was
as someone who was raised in the UK, but was sort of steeped very early in Americana, whether it was the TV shows we were seeing, whether it was Hemingway books and Bukowski books and other things we were reading, whatever it was. We loved it. I always equate it with a songwriter who mentions an obscure street name or a section of downtown city or something in a song. It's evocative. You suddenly go, wait, where's that? How do I get there?
Yeah.
Whereas nowadays, with everything being homogenized and sort of shot in either Canada or Georgia, it seems, and everything is kind of just shot as the action is happening and follow the action and don't care where the action's taking place and don't really care like where all this fits in. I think the appeal and the thrill, certainly for myself, but I think for other film fans, going back to sort of the 70s, 80s, and 90s, because once you get the indies of the 70s, you have them filming more on location. Like you think of all the, whether it's the Scorsese films, the Coppola films, or the Hopper films, or whatever, they're all shooting on location, and it's the location that's sort of informing a lot of the action that's happening. But even as you move into the 80s and 90s, there was no creating something on a green screen. You had to, if you wanted to shoot something in the jungle, you had to go to the jungle. If you wanted to shoot something in downtown LA, you had to block off streets and things. So talk about that then. Talk about the location shooting, the obviously the issues you might come across, how in those days was Los Angeles sort of much more open to stuff like that, and also getting away with ramping cars or shooting cars through fireballs and things like that in the middle of like a downtown metropolitan area. I would love some stories about that if there is some.
Well, to be honest, we when we first started, the easiest thing for us to shoot was live on the street at Hollywood Boulevard, and they're all pretty well lit.
Right.
And at the beginning, we didn't do permits. We just it was real guerrilla filmmaking, and like in one of the shows, the actor's going to be on a bus, so I had a 16 millimeter camera. It was pretty small, and I would just hide in another jacket. We'd get on the bus, and we'd shoot him riding around with the background Los Angeles until we got thrown off.
Right.
And that was kind of, we did a lot of that. I remember we shot a scene in front of a police station, and I said, we're going to get in trouble here. We had a generator across the street. We had one or two lights. We rehearsed the scene like crazy in this RV, and then we just went and shot it within 15 minutes. But cops were going by and they didn't stop us, which I don't think we could do today. I don't think you can do that today.
And lastly, of these small clips from other conversations, editor Paul Volk.
I mean, it was huge. Like, let's continue getting better at what we're doing.
Right.
And to attract Wings, we gave him directing jobs. Art of Dying, which is, I think, an amazing, wonderful.
I love that movie so much.
Yeah, isn't it? It's great. And and Living to Die, and
yeah, I was going to ask you about Living to Die later on, but Living to Die, you did the editor, right? You edited both Living to Die and Art of Dying.
And
so what was it like working with him in an edit suite?
Well, he wasn't there.
Okay.
Actually.
Okay.
but working on set with him was great. I did Boom for most of that movie, Art of Dying, and that was very interesting too. Actually, the whole making love with the food scene and the horse on the beach, and
I've heard that some of that was sort of improvised, but I don't quite know. I mean, obviously today
it was all pretty much improv. It came out of his mind.
Okay. But did he speak to people beforehand? Like, I'm going to grab this milk and throw this everywhere? Or was it just something he did?
Well, I wasn't.
Poor Kathleen Kinmont had to go along with it.
Yeah. Oh, she was quite a trooper when it came to that, because she was married to Lorenzo Lamas at the time.
Right.
He'd occasionally come to the set and visit. This cool Lorenzo riding up on his motorcycle and coming in for a while and then riding away.
Yeah.
It was all in Wings's head.
Right.
If he asked for all the food stuff and whatnot to be on set, and then he started doing it, and then and then she went along with it.
Right.
But doing the killing scenes, like the shower scene or the way we did the killing with the buzzsaw or whatever, that was actually all so very interesting because it was so down and dirty. And throwing pieces of meat around and
right.
That.
Well, you sort of see the transition, don't you, between something like Shotgun, right, which has the sort of serial killer element, right? So you've got the kind of grindhousey violence and seediness, right? And then obviously towards the end of Shotgun, you're like, oh, let's try our hand at sort of an action sequence. He sort of builds this tank and he drives off, and there's the sort of big standoff at the end. Then you have something like, I always think of something like either Living to Die or The Art of Dying as sort of that next step. You're keeping a lot of the kind of like grindhousey, seedy elements, because obviously I think that's kind of what I think Wings Hauser is kind of a fan of, just based on the other movies he's done. But also you then allow yourself to start whipping in more action sequences and building them throughout the movie rather than at the end. And so I see them as transitional.
Well, I think, what one of the things you're referring to was the script's getting better. I mean, there's nothing to substitute. And I think the Art of Dying script was pretty good.
It's great. Yeah.
The other thing was, as we started to do the 35 and spend much more money than we did at City Lights, and we're now PM and we're shooting on 35, which costs a lot more to begin with, and spending a lot more money to kind of lock in, guarantee a sale through George had relationships with all the foreign countries. One of the things was we got to do an action scene every 7 minutes. And now we're entering into the more it was shoot 'em out and fights, but car chase scenes and whatnot or I suppose foot chases and whatnot too. But like he'd start when he was watching a cut down in the edit bay, he would start to get nervous and sweaty if if we waited too long between action scenes, and this is it just kind of like became the PM way, and he would actually go and talk to the buyers and ask them, what would you like to see in a movie? What kind of scene would you like? And sometimes they'd say, well, let's see an armored car, or let's see a bus, or let's add a helicopter, and they felt like they were part of the filmmaking process, so it would be much more likely that they'd pay us a decent amount of money for the movie,
right?
And pre-sell, they'd give us money before it was even shot necessarily, So there's that PM formula, like action every 7 minutes and not too long in between.
Yeah.
And just spending more money on those action scenes. The City Lights was basically just some, shoot 'em out and hand-to-hand combat for the most part, very little car stuff. And then as PM started moving, we started doing the big chase scenes with Spiro, prior to the new franchise.
Right. And now, as I said before, we're going to be talking to Steve Mitchell, who recently completed a documentary on the life of Wings Hauser called Working Class Actor. Thank you ever so much for
it's
being
my pleasure.
On this show, appearing on the PM Entertainment podcast, and to talk about your friend and documentary subject, Wings Hauser.
Well, thanks for having me, John. It's obviously a little rough right now, sort of getting used to the idea that he's gone. As I've said to a number of people, we were sort of shocked but not surprised.
Yeah.
Is kind of the way we looked at it. We knew that he was in weakening health, but we didn't know, all the particulars. Yeah, it's weird. It's tough losing anybody that you know. And when you make a movie like this, like what I did with King Cohen, the Larry Cohen picture, you sort of, I think what happens, you can't help but become friends with these people, and one of the things that was pleasurable for me was I got to hang out with Wings and just be a couple of guys who like talking about what we like talking about. I wasn't crazy about him last fall when, he really gave me a hard time about the Yankees losing the World Series to the Dodgers because I'm from New York.
Yeah.
And he's an LA guy, so this was a big deal for him. And, in retrospect, I kind of go, well, I'm glad he saw the Dodgers win the World Series.
Yeah.
So that was nice.
Yes.
But, he was an interesting guy. I mean, we would have these lunches that would go on forever. I mean, a couple of hours at the very least. And he was candid. He was funny. He was sort of humble. I say sort of only because, he's an actor, so you never know. But I liked him. I thought he was genuine. I thought he was authentic. Telling his story has been a very interesting kind of journey. I don't want to sound pretentious with that, but when the origin of this project started just before COVID, and my producing partner Matt Verbois and Dan McKeon and I and a couple of other film lunatics used to get together once a month and have a big time movie night, replete with alcohol and dopiness and eating bad food. Although I don't think pizza's bad food, but there was a lot of that, and we had a lot of laughs. And one night we watched Vice Squad, and one of the guys had not seen it. And I think also he had not seen much of Wings, or Wings had not made a really big impression on him.
Right.
And he said afterwards, he said, "This guy's great. We got to watch more stuff with him." And then COVID hit. And what happened was we would get together every Friday night via Zoom, kind of like a book club. And instead of reading a book, we would watch a prescribed Wings Hauser movie or some TV. And this went on for about a year. We were finding a way to find a lot of his stuff, the good, the bad, and the really not so good. But what happened that was fascinating for us was whether it was an A picture, a B picture, or a C picture, he was always really good.
Yeah.
I mean, he'd be the first one to agree with me that he made some really crummy movies. I'll just leave it at that, PG-13 version. but he was never crummy in them. He was always good, always interesting. And Wings, I think, was kind of a force of nature persona actor. I think when you would see Wings in one thing, he was pretty much Wings in another thing. Occasionally, when he would do television later in his career, he was maybe trying to go towards character stuff. Right. But it was still a version of Wings. And he was great at playing Wings. So anyway, just to finish the origin of all this, because it's sort of amusing, the wife of the guy who was not familiar with Wings, she said, he ought to know about this. And so she used to be an agent, and she got in touch with another casting guy who found his manager.
Yeah.
And we arranged a phone call. And he's not really technically very savvy. So it was a phone call over a speaker held to a microphone on a computer.
Yeah.
But we talked to the guy for about an hour and a half. And he was a lot of fun. He had great recall. He was very entertaining. He was always a performer.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how this got started, because my partner, Matt Verbois, said, "Is there a movie with this guy?" And I said, "I need to meet him one more time." And so we met under strict COVID considered conditions at the Manhattan Beach Film Studio in Manhattan Beach.
Yeah.
And we sat around outside and we sort of continued this conversation that we had with him. And afterwards, we sort of walked away saying, I think there's something here. Because the trick, and I think I've done this with you in previous interviews or interviews, you got to have somebody who's really interesting at the core of it. If they're not interesting, like their reputation can't be interesting, they have to be interesting.
Yes.
We thought he was interesting and we said, "Hey, we'd like to do it." And he said, "Okay."
Yeah. And
that's how we got started.
Yeah, and I think it's fascinating what you were saying there about sort of Wings' persona in the films and how it would come out. Certainly in the PM films, but I see it in other films as well. But I just think he had more control over it on the ones that he directed. But you can see his improvisation. Like, he puts so much improvisation in his films very often, I think, because they're B movies that need, we got to get from A to B here, Wings. We need this scene that's going to tell us that.
Right.
I think there's a scene in Pale Blood where he suddenly realizes the guy is a vampire and he's going back and forth on the computer with the film footage. And there's clearly no script written. There's just realize he's a vampire. That's probably what was written down. And yet he does a full 2-minute scene getting up from the desk, walking over to his other desk, getting a drink out, talking to himself, trying to rationalize it. And there are so many moments like that in so many of Wings' films that while I do find him very compelling in the characters that he plays, and while there are subtle nuances, I think, to the different parts that he's played throughout some of these movies, when he improvs or goes a little off script or does his Wings thing, it's almost when he's the most compelling and the most interesting and the most alive. I liken him very much to Michael Moriarty in the movies that he did with Larry Cohen. If you think of Cue the Winged Serpent, I wonder where Larry's words and Moriarty's sort of jazz improv meet, you know what I mean? And I feel that a lot with Wings.
Well, I think both of these guys live in the moment, which is the thing you always hear actors talk about. That Wings told us one story, it's a little tease from something that's in the doc that I'm working on, is that when he did his first stage play, he was doing it, his dad had a theater in Thousand Oaks, California, and his dad was a writer. And he and Kurt Russell's dad, Bing Russell, built this theater out there, almost literally.
Yeah.
And Wings got a chance to play a part in a play. And Bing Russell, Kurt's dad, said to him, he says, "All right, you've done all the preparation. You know what you've got to do." And then he just said, "Let it go." And if there's a sentence that kind of sums up Wings, is he lets it go. He's in the moment. He's there. He lets it go. I think he trusts his instincts. I don't think he makes a judgment about the characters or anything like that. I know that I will tease you with this, that Ramrod was a tough part for him.
Yeah.
Because it put him in touch with some incredible darkness. And, you know, just to sort of do a sidebar on Ramrod for a second, there are 2 or 3 performances in the 80s where everybody just goes, who the hell is this guy? I'm sure you felt that way when you saw Alan Rickman in Die Hard for the first time.
Right.
You know,
yeah.
We're movie guys. We know the players. And who's Alan Rickman? Well, you know, he walks out of the back of the truck, you know, with the terrorist robbers, and you just go, who's this guy?
Yeah.
Well, Wings was like that in Vice Squad. That Wings made such a dent, you know, in all of us as an actor. And I think that he was always sort of letting it go, and he trusted himself. And I think a lot of the work, good, bad, or otherwise, always sort of grew out of him, like how he trusted himself and his ability to just kind of be there in the moment and let it go.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's real acting school stuff, but it worked for him.
No, I think it is. And I mean, there's obviously multiple schools of acting, but I've definitely heard others talk about this idea of the main thing you have to do is preparation, and then to some extent throw it away. And then there are actors who, when they're on camera, then are either very technical or they're very emotive, or they have their tricks of the trade. But I think all of them, to a person, would say, you know, preparation is the number one thing. Unless you're going to, Daniel Day-Lewis it and just stay in character the whole time.
Listen, I know of certain actors, you know, they prepare it within an inch of its life. You know, they know how they're going to play the punctuation. And I think Wings was much looser than that.
Yeah.
I think that's what made him interesting, because in a sense, he always had a certain dangerousness as an actor.
Yeah.
Not like anybody was in peril, but you sort of go, what's he going to do?
Yeah.
You know? And that makes him exciting to watch.
Unpredictable is definitely a word that I would use. And I think that he was both very unpredictable, but also in a weird way, fiercely real. Like there was a one hand you were like, well, this could go off into a flight of fancy. Like, I have no idea where this could go. This could go, you know, surreal or sci-fi or whatever. But then on the other hand, there was always this like dangerously real or incredible thing like behind his eyes or behind his performance, no matter what he was playing. And it's interesting because you have those. There are sort of key touchstone Wings movies that not everyone would know, but I would hope film fans would know. And it's sort of your Vice Squad and Tough Guys Don't Dance. And
he's amazing in that.
He's amazing in that.
He's the word that kind of comes to my mind for him is powerhouse.
Yeah.
That he has powerhouse energy. He has powerhouse kind of charisma that the lens finds very interesting. You know, I do a lot of commentary tracks, and I often talk about whether or not, you know, an actor is liked by the camera. You know, I think that makes the difference between, you know, great actors and movie stars. If the camera loves you, or is more importantly, fascinated by you, then you're in pretty good shape. And I think Wings had that. I think the camera was fascinated by him. You know, the camera just sort of said, well, what's he going to do?
Right.
And and, you know, that's why he's always good in whatever he makes. And listen, we watched some VHSs of some of his, you know, lesser movies. I don't even know if they would be considered Bs. They were more like Cs.
Yeah.
And as mediocre or not great or not well conceived or not well assembled or whatever it is, he showed up and he did his job.
Yes.
And that's what makes him, I think, worthy of people's attention. And I think the people who know him know that.
Yeah.
You know, it's that old Howard Stern joke. You know, when Howard Stern made that movie Private Parts and they were doing surveys, they said they hate him, but they want to see what he's going to do next.
Right.
Well, I don't think people hated Wings, but I think they wanted to see what he was going to do next.
Oh, yeah. One of the ones that stood out to me recently that we covered was the 2 Gregory Dark movies he made, Dead Man Walking and Street Asylum. I thought he was great in both those movies.
Yeah, it doesn't matter whether it's ABC, direct to video, made literally for the cassette. There are a million stories about how cheap movies got on VHS because stores, of course, needed product. But I don't think there was any judgment with Wings. Now, he might have privately said to me, he says, "Yeah, Steve, was going through a divorce and I needed the money." But it's not his work is not, "I'm going through a divorce and I need the money" kind of performance.
No. And
that's the thing that we noticed when we watched all his stuff.
And he's surprisingly able to jump around genres as well. It's not always, I know he gets sort of labeled as, I think there's a letterboxd list that's literally Wings Hauser on the cover of this movie with a gun, I think is one of the jokey letterbox list titles.
Yeah, and there's only about 400 of those, right?
Yeah, right. But he does odd ones like In Between and Brian Trenchard Smith movie, which I would consider sort of along with Tough Guys Don't Dance, kind of his other crowning achievement, which is The Siege of Fireplace Glory. And I understand that's action adjacent, but it's more of a war movie. It's more of an emotional movie. It's more of
he had told me that movie was, that movie was kind of a big deal for him on a number of levels, but he had a very good friend who served. And so on the one hand, he's very much on the side of the citizen soldiers who wound up going over there. And yet I think he was against the war. So as a part, he was feeling kind of both sides of I was going to say argument, but it wasn't an argument. But, there was a certain kind of conflict for him, kind of moral conflict. Like he was pro-military, he was pro-GIs, but he also, like most of us back in the day, we were not crazy about the war.
Right.
But again, he just sort of used that for who the character was.
Right.
He was, I think that one required a little bit more heavy lifting on his part acting wise. And he stepped up. Yeah. Tough Guys, you ask 27 people if it's a good movie and you're going to get 27 answers.
Yeah. But
it's not uninteresting regardless of what you think of it. And he is fantastic.
He is fantastic. And I think what's, now you're able to kind of go back and watch some of the interviews that Norman Mailer did about the movie and things, is that whether people like it or not, whether they think it's a good movie or not, or whatever, I consider it a success because from everything Norman Mailer said, it's what Norman Mailer set out to make. Yeah. I don't think Norman Mailer was under any delusion as to what he was making. I think that he wanted to make a ghost story. Well, there's some of that in there. He wanted to make a comedy. Well, there's some of that in there. He wanted to make a love letter to that part of Massachusetts, which is definitely in there. And he wanted to make this sort of film noir. So, it is Twin Peaks 2 years before Twin Peaks. If you watch Tough Guys Don't Dance and think of all the genres that it's playing with, and then you think, and it's got the Badalamenti score and everything else, and then you think of sort of the tropes that Lynch plays with, both in Twin Peaks, but then also again in Lost Highway and some of the other movies he made, it's not a million miles from it. Just because David Lynch is David Lynch and Norman Mailer is Norman Mailer, it doesn't mean that one should be held up necessarily as greater than the other one. I think there's pros to both, I think.
Yeah, and things were bumpy between Wings and Norman in the beginning.
Yes.
And they had kind of a little bit of a showdown. I think two guys with ego. Yep. And they kind of got past it, and they realized that they were very kindred spirits at the end of the day. And they became very fast friends. And according to Wings, they stayed friends, forever after that.
No, I've heard that from both sides. I think Wings is interviewed on the disc and Norman is, and I think they both kind of say the same thing. But about PM Entertainment specifically, I think what's very interesting, his relationship there with Joseph especially. I don't know whether Rick was also had that relationship, but I think Joe was more the passionate, outgoing, personable one of the two guys behind the company.
I got the impression that Joe was sort of the mogul, and Rick Pepin was the on-set guy.
Yeah, no, my understanding is that yes, Joseph certainly has that mogul quality, although they also then had a sales guy. I think Joseph was more the creative and the mogul. I think Joseph was the one who was like, I always wanted to make a movie. He wanted to be like the sort of Syrian Woody Allen. He wanted to make a comedy. In fact, the first movie they make for City Lights was a comedy, and everyone who watched it went, "Don't do that. Do action movies." But I think Joseph was the one who had some real passion, and when you hear his story and how he put the company together. But I think you're right. He's also, obviously the money man as well. He went into real estate, and he's done other stuff since then that obviously he likes that lifestyle.
He's done very, very well.
Yes, he has a nice Beverly Hills home and everything else. Yeah. But what was interesting to me, and I spoke to Joseph a little bit about this, although, and he did credit your documentary with rekindling his relationship with Wings. He hadn't spoken to Wings in probably 20 years, and they actually had a few lunches after.
That's nice.
After he was in the documentary. But I always thought it was fascinating, and they did this with a few actors. They did it with Lawrence Hilton Jacobs, they did it with C. Thomas Howell, believe it or not, and they did it with Wings Hauser, where they gave them, the ability to direct, which I don't know if Wings. So I guess my question to you is, did Wings tell you that he always wanted to direct and here was his chance, or was it just something that he was interested in trying out?
I think the answer is kind of D, all of the above. The thing that Joe liked about Wings is he felt that Wings, from on an acting level, brought a certain heightened level to the performances. I mean, let's face it, they were making B movies.
Yes.
And they were, getting them done. And the thing that Wings was doing was he was elevating them with his performance. And then, Joseph, I think, very wisely said, well, maybe this guy should direct for us. And so what happened is that I think those movies were better movies because of that. Right. And Joe was smart enough to realize that, well, I got a real actor directing, and then having a real actor as the director might also help improve the quality of the cast in his movies and or get better performances.
Yeah, because I mean, Wings does bring people in with him. He brings
he was he was very, very game to let Wings do it. I don't think Wings' first movie is that great, to tell you the truth. Was that Cold Fire?
Cold Fire, yes. I'm not the biggest fan of that one compared to the other two.
Yeah, the Vegas one, which was it Living to Die?
Living to Die. That's fascinating, that one.
We, all of us in the sort of Wings, somebody once called us Hausernauts.
Yes, I like that.
The Hausernauts all thought that was maybe not only his best movie for PM, but, sometimes when you're looking at B movies, you go, well, it's a good B movie. Whereas Living to Die, you go, that's kind of an A-, or it's a B+. It's more than what it was. And I think a lot of that had to do with Wings, and I think a lot of his ideas for how to shoot it. And, it's got a pretty brave ending. You don't expect an ending. I won't say anything more than that. Maybe it's a tease. But, Joe really liked Wings, and he liked what he did for his movies.
Yeah. And I know you spoke to Kathleen Kinmont, and The Art of Dying, I think what Wings brings to it is this, he's questioning everything. He's questioning what relationships are, and Kathleen Kinmont plays this strong, sexual, positive woman who has sort of taken charge of this relationship in a way that was, sort of post-feminist in its way. Yeah. But there are moments in the movie that seem so intimate because they are seemingly improvised.
When Wings goes to act, whether he's directing or not, he's there to play. He uses a lot of sports metaphors, because he's a big sports guy. He wanted to be a professional athlete before he wanted to be an actor.
Yeah.
He wanted to be an NFL player, and he played some college ball, but I think he kind of banged up his knee or knees or something, and he never really got the chance. But he goes to play. And when he's interacting with other actors, especially if the characters are supposed to be playful for one another, he created that environment. Yeah. And she fed off that, and he fed off that. And there's that scene where I think she's riding on the beach with a horse.
Yes.
That was just one of those things where he said, hey, there's a horse down there. Why don't we just have you kind of ride up?
Yeah.
That here's a guy, he's making a movie where he doesn't have a lot of time. He doesn't have a lot of money, but he has the ability to sort of look around his environment and say, let's use that.
Right.
He's very open to using stuff. And I think she was too. And she had said to me, kind of in a broad sense, that, she trusted him, and because he created the atmosphere for that.
Right.
So when they're doing the fight stuff and everything like that, I mean, it looks pretty terrible, and she looks like she's suffering. She had said how much she enjoyed doing it.
Yes, when she's fighting with the director, the guy comes into her house. Yeah,
it's it's fake. It's the movies,
right?
And then also as the director, it was something that helped her enjoy the process and enjoy making the movie. And I thought they had great chemistry too. You can't if that's not there, well, it doesn't matter how good they are as actors. So chemistry is really at the core of it.
Oh, they had great chemistry, and it also feels like, again, there's this blurring of the lines between the character and reality, where it does feel like Wings himself personally is sort of working through maybe a prior relationship, or maybe bumps in the road of a relationship he was in at the time, or something like that. It's fascinating. And then you get these scenes. I mean, talk about him as a director, and I know he worked with Rick Pepin, who is a fantastic cinematographer. That was his passion. I think that's what Rick does from most of the movies for PM. He's the cinematographer along with Ken Blakey. But you get two shots, I think, of Kathleen Kinmont that I would put up against any of the kind of road movies or beautiful movies of the 70s, those kind of, Vanishing Points or those kind of movies. One is her on the horse with the sun behind her, and she's riding around, and the camera just allows her, she's wearing the white gown and everything, and it sort of allows her to be angelic in that moment and kind of biblical in a weird way. She's like the white horse, white woman in a white dress on a white horse. It's kind of got that the Johnny Cash line, right? Or the Bible line from Revelations. And then the other one is when she's being followed by the detective and she's riding up PCH, and Wings and Rick allow this sort of, it suddenly becomes one of those 70s California road movies. Like suddenly, the soundtrack
when she's on the motorcycle?
But she's on the motorcycle.
Yeah.
It suddenly becomes, and there's a thicker grain to the film, and it just looks lusher, and the light is hitting it a certain way. Like it's odd to me, PM Entertainment was so run and gun, and yet almost every single one of their movies has a moment in it where you're like, if these guys were given 10 million, let alone 1 million. If these guys were given 10 million and 3 months, they could have made a phenomenal film. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, we don't know. I think there's certain directors, if you give them more money, you're still going to get the lesser budget looking kind of movie. But the PM, when I was talking to Joseph, I've seen a lot of their movies.
Yeah.
Also, they were very canny. They said, okay, we know we need to have kind of like X, X, and X, and X, either for the trailer or just, for the purposes of sales.
Yeah.
And they sort of knew what they needed, and Wings gave them what they needed to sell the movies, but he also elevated them as well. So I like to think that what Joseph was telling me about allowing him to have freedom, it was legit. And Wings had a blast doing those movies, all of them.
Yeah. I think of also the other one you said that I think your collective thought was the best one, Living to Die. There's sort of interesting moments in that movie where, even though it's got nothing to do with the plot and it's just leading into another scene, there is this like expressionist dance for like 3 minutes that he films with all these sort of neon hues and things. And then there's a scene in the back of a makeshift casino that's, I know it's like a bunch of guys around a table, but it's almost set up like that dog playing cards painting. There's little, I don't know whether I'm being pretentious or looking too deep into this stuff, but there seems to be some references in there that I see the little artist in Wings kind of coming out.
Well, I'll give you a taste of that. There's that scene where I think he's talking, again, I've seen so many of them, they kind of blend together. But I think he's talking to an informant at this neon sign graveyard.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's a scene that he really liked because, in a sense, he was living in the Vegas. The scene was taking place in a Vegas graveyard, not where bodies were buried, but where neon was buried. The symbols of Vegas were buried. And he was always looking for stuff like that in Vegas that he could take advantage of.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, I don't think we're wrong in calling that movie sort of a tragedy.
Right.
And
oh,
so
definitely.
I think Wings was in touch with that aspect of the story. There's another quickie thing when I think he and Darcy DeMoss are riding on horseback in the snow and stuff like that.
Yes, up to his cabin. That I'm not quite sure. Having lived in Vegas, I'm not quite sure where the snowy cabin's meant to be, but yes, okay.
But I think that they knew that there was going to be some snow, and he just said this might make for an interesting moment.
Yes.
Montage. Just to sort of maybe make it look a little different.
Yeah.
You know, Wings also was trying to work against expectations, I think, from time to time.
Oh, yeah, most definitely. I think you can tell that from his films. Definitely. Do you, Steve, have a personal favorite? Do you have 2 or 3 films that when you think of Wings, you're gonna put on and enjoy from his?
Well, it's always, Vice Squad is always going to be probably the big boy on the block. I still don't know what to make of Tough Guys Don't Dance, but if I'm going to watch something for Wings, and again, all the performances are really good in that. I like that. Living to Die is one of them. You know, I really like The Insider, you know, even though he only has one real scene in it.
Yeah.
He's so great in it. And by the way, he was scared to death to do it.
Oh, I'm sure.
He was sort of making a little bit of a comeback with that because this is not a secret. Certainly, talking about in the movie that, you know, he was drinking.
Yep.
And that was a big deal in a big movie, and he was a little, I think, intimidated by the directorial firepower and also the firepower of the cast. But I love watching that scene. I in a sense, I can see him. I know he's making a comeback.
Right.
You know, as an A-lister in that. And it's great to watch because, you know, he prepped, obviously, and he let it go, as Bing Russell said.
Yeah.
And it's a really great scene. It's also a good movie, and it's a powerful moment in the movie.
Yes.
And I think my one complaint was, I said, Jesus, I wish they could have had him do at least one more scene somewhere else in the picture.
Definitely.
I'm kind of fond of, as are the Hauser-nauts, of this dopey series he did in Canada called Lightning Force.
Right.
It was this really cheap, shot on film, you know, edited on video, probably posted on video, kind of syndicated action show. But I don't know. It's one of those things like if I got together with the guys, we'd say, let's watch a couple of Lightning Forces just for fun. Is it great? No. Is it kind of crap? Kind of. But it's just enjoyable. And I know he had the time of his life making it.
It's 13 hours of Wings. It's 13 episodes of Wings.
Yeah,
so, I mean, there's bound to be some fascinating stuff in there.
Yeah, I mean, it's listen, it's 90s syndicated television.
Right.
Or late 80s. I don't remember which, but one or the other.
91 to 92 it was on.
Yeah, there you go. But he had a lot of fun up there, and he just said, yeah, we didn't have time to think about it. You know, they were out there to play.
Yeah.
You know.
No, a fascinating guy, and I cannot wait for your documentary. You did such a great job with King Cohen, and the fact that it's funny, you know, I was and remain an enormous fan of Larry Cohen. The fact that your next film was a Wings Hauser documentary, I'm just thinking, like, what other weird corner of my fandom is Steve going to pick next?
The idea of doing a PM doc was something we had talked about a little bit too. PM knew who they were.
Right.
And they never tried to become too big for their own britches, as they say, or somebody might have said in the Western.
Yeah.
They knew who they were. I think they inched up the budget ladder a bit. But generally, I think when they did that, it's just to provide maybe bigger or better and more commercial action. They knew what they were. They knew what they were trying. I mean, they were like Roger Corman in that sense. They never really tried to be too. They didn't try to go beyond their own parameters, I think.
No.
And, you know, one of the things that I'm sure you've talked about, because I've heard this, so it can't be a secret, is that there is somebody in Europe who's found about 30 of their negatives.
Yes, I'm in contact with him. Claudio Ulrich, his name is, and he works for Focus Media. and they've been putting out PM Entertainment films on, because over in Germany and Switzerland and that area, he's in Switzerland, but they mainly play to the German market, which is a big action market. They have what they call media books, and they look like books. They have soft covers and everything, but the discs are inside. So they're slightly different to the Blu-rays we have over here, or even the box sets that we have over here. And the extras on the Blu-rays are really just like this. So Claudio has called up Gary Daniels or called up Don the Dragon Wilson or Art Camacho, these people, and interviewed them like this, and then you just get the kind of Zoom call on so they're a little rough around the edges, but yes, they've cleaned up the 35 mil. The films look fantastic. It's very good considering we don't have any of these movies high def, and I think his plan now at least is to put out at least 42. I think he's found 42 35 mil versions of these movies, and he's trying to source the rest of them. So he has at least half of the movies.
They're finding the negatives, and they're doing their scans from the negatives. These movies are going to be revelation. These Blu-rays or whatever they're going to be are going to be revelations, because all we saw was VHS, technology at work and VHS transfers.
Yeah.
And you would get sizzle in the reds, and and they also used a lot of fog filter, which didn't translate to tape terribly well. But if they're going to the negs, these will seem like almost different movies. They're going to look so good.
They're going to look fantastic, and they do.
And it's exciting as a fan to know that that's coming, because you go, well, how great is this? Because I watched a movie on Vinegar Syndrome, a Vinegar Syndrome movie the other night with my producing partners, Blue Vengeance.
Yeah.
It's a movie none of us had seen, and it has its charms. But again, it looks so fantastic. It was in the proper aspect ratio, and I think they were making the scan from the negatives. I sound like a broken record here, but as a fan, I look forward to sort of re-experiencing the PM movies looking the way that I'm sure Rick Pepin was hoping that they would look.
Oh yeah, and that's what I mean is so they put out. It's the only difficult thing is this. They're mainly being released in Europe. To import them independently, so in other words, to go on to use a VPN, go on a German website, buy them and ship them over, because the euro is stronger than the dollar, and also because the pricing is different over there. To import them, you're paying like $65 a disc. It's cost prohibitive. There is a website over here called brotherbelial.com. Little Henlotter nod there. That must have imported them themselves or worked directly with the distributor, and they have had some of them. So the Ring of Fire trilogy box set is still available on there. Deadly Breed is still available on there, and Firepower is still available on there. And those are more like $34 a disc, I think. And I think the Ring of Fire trilogy is $71. So cheaper than shipping them over.
I think if you're a movie lover, and you're not snooty, I mean, if you enjoy, grindhouse stuff and 47th Street type stuff, like I grew up with, you want to see these movies, you want to see them look good. I mean, for guys like us, it's a great time to be a fan and to be a collector, because while I'm not enormously crazy about the 21st century as a movie fan, it's a fantastic time to be around because of all the advancements.
Yes.
In terms of scanning and replication and, digging hard enough to find the negatives and to go back to that. So yeah, as a fan, it's a great time to be around, and it's a great, and hardcore fans will spend the money. We want to see our darlings looking the best they could possibly look. And so again, bringing it back to PM and what's possibly on the horizon, it's exciting to maybe see these movies in a way that we've never seen them before. Oh, and that's exciting. It's exciting to see old stuff look new again,
Oh yeah. I mean, I cannot wait. I see it in the next 5 years, someone discovering these movies and going, can you believe these stunts? Can you believe they did? Because I think people think the first time anyone jumped a bus was in Speed. You know what I mean? I don't think that they know that there was sort of B movies out there ramping city buses through big walls of fire and driving cars out of buildings. I think when people realize that's the talent Yeah, fascinating films out there that I cannot wait for people to be able to sit down and watch on Blu-ray. And there's a market for them. Yeah, and the more Wings we can get out on Blu-ray, the better. I mean, to have Living to Die and The Art of Dying, and even Killer's Edge, also known as Blood Money, which pairs him up with Zadar, which is an interesting pairing.
Oh yeah. A little Robert Zadar sidebar.
Yeah.
When I first moved out to California from New York back in the 80s, the mid 80s, when I was younger, I used to say, well, I'm going to go to the gym out here. And Robert Zadar was a member of that gym, and he would show up and kind of walk up and down and sort of show off his muscles and stuff like that. And I'm literally going, who the fuck is this guy? Because I had not seen him in anything yet.
Right.
And he was just this very bizarre California character to this transplanted New Yorker.
Yeah.
And then, we started seeing him in movies, and, the rest is history.
Steve, thanks again so much for talking Wings with us and sharing a little bit from the documentary. Can't wait to see the Wings Hauser documentary. It's going to be great. Was there anything that, his passing, kind of, you had an idea that you wanted to do something more with him, and then his passing has kind of put you got everything you needed? Yeah.
I'm happy to report he saw it. He, I said, so do you want to throw something at me? He said, no, I want to hug you. So that was a nice compliment from him, because, you want him to like the work. I mean, you want everybody to like your work. That's just natural. But, it's nice that he liked it.
I think there's a clip you have in the trailer where he says something along the lines of, you see, and now they're doing a movie of my life or something like that. And again, in typical Wings fashion, because he doesn't hide too much, I could tell just from the way he said it, how much that actually meant to him, like emotionally, I think, and how much that meant to his body.
One of my favorite moments in any movie, because it's touching and human, but it's also profound, is that last line in Pepin, where Pepin is walking towards the camera and he says, all glory is fleeting. And I think if you're in the movie business or the TV business, sometimes it is fleeting and it kind of goes away. And I think in Wings' case, it gave him a chance to get curtain calls. We had a screening of Vice Squad at the Egyptian Theater in Hollywood some months ago.
Yeah, I've seen that online.
Gary Swanson and Wings were on stage to talk about Vice Squad after the movie. And what was great about it was it gave Wings, as well as Gary, an opportunity to get a bit of a curtain call. Yeah. That was one of the most rewarding things for me about King Cohen and going around with Larry to a number of these festivals, to see that Larry was getting these curtain calls, because I think Larry felt, and I think everybody who isn't working all the time feels like they were forgotten. And they haven't been forgotten.
I think it's wonderful. These people need to be celebrated. They've given us such joy and such life and films that will never be replicated. Well, we live in a world now where a movie is either 40 million or 40 cents. There's no $4 million movies really in the same way that they used to be. The odd ones here and there, but not in the same way.
Like I said before, we live in great times to be fans.
Yeah.
You get a chance to have these movies have their new curtain calls.
Yeah.
And looking better than ever, younger, fresher, and better than ever. So, again, it's not a terrible thing. And it's, to your credit that you're choosing to celebrate this stuff.
Yeah, no, definitely. And we all should. And I think that's the beauty of podcasting and the availability of distribution. I think that's the one thing that I don't think my generation I think we don't take it for granted. I think a lot of the younger generation take it for granted. And I think our generation is still saying, no, wait a minute. This feels like a loophole. It feels like the billionaires and millionaires sort of gave us the internet and didn't realize quite what they were giving us with YouTube and podcasts and streaming and other stuff. And that's where my heart lives. That's what I'll keep championing until they pull the plug, until they go, wait, did we give these people a bunch of free options to do their own creativity? No, we can't do that. They'll come after us at a certain point, but we've got to keep using the airwaves or the proverbial airwaves until they.
Yeah, it's nice. It's nice to share too.
Yes, it really
But
is. And the
you
connection.
you never know, somebody's going to listen to some of this stuff or see something and they go, oh, I want to see more of that. So, you're in a position, influencing sounds so, arm twisty.
Oh, I hate it. Yeah.
But the thing that's the reason why I do all the commentaries that I do is that I want to share my enthusiasm for something.
Yeah.
And say why I think it's interesting, even if the movies sometimes are not home runs.
Right.
There's a thing that used to exist, and then I'll shut up and we'll go and say goodbye and all that stuff, is that when I would go to the movies in the old days, sometimes you see a movie that doesn't completely work, but it was what I called an interesting failure.
Yes.
And I think today movies, that doesn't happen very often. A movie either sticks to your forearms or your skull or whatever when you walk out of the theater, or it doesn't. And I find that it doesn't for the most part. So that the idea of sharing the ideas of PM and why they were good, because it was real after all. And talking about this stuff is good because, you might create some interest on a person who hadn't thought about it.
Yeah, 100%. And then people keep talking about living in divided times, and we definitely do. But doing this for the last 13 years, I have only built connections. I've only expanded my friend group across the globe, have people in multiple countries I could go hang with.
Yeah, it's great.
Podcasting has never made me rich, has never made me famous, and I don't want it. I don't need either of those two things to happen, but it has given me life, friends, and connections in a way that I think people underestimate. Steve, thank you for being one of them.
Well, thanks. Likewise, it's a chance to expand your world too, which is nice.
Definitely. Always good. Well, best of luck with the Wings Hauser doc.
Working Class Actor is the title.
Working Class Actor. Yeah. Let's reconnect when it comes out so that we can give it a proper review. And once I've seen it. That. And yeah, thank you so much for your time tonight. I didn't know who to turn to who could speak for Wings or speak about Wings. And I know it's still raw for you. So thank you so much for
that. But I think you would think it was okay.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah, go ahead, talk to him. Sure. What the hell? He's that kind of guy. John, thanks so much.
All right. Well, we're still going here on the PM Entertainment podcast, Wings Hauser Celebration and Memorial and Art of Dying coverage. That was Steve Mitchell. What a fantastic conversation that was. As I feel like we are putting a ton of effort and a ton of passion and genuine love for this movie, for this actor, for this production company into this episode. I hope you all agree, and I hope you'll all go rate and review us on all the podcast platforms that allow ratings and reviewing. Mainly Apple Podcasts would be a huge, huge help. And don't forget to like, share, comment, and all that good stuff on social media. All right, now we have our conversation with the excellent Kathleen Kinmont. And then we'll be going back to finish up with Adam Thorn about the art of dying.
Thank you for having me. It's nice to be here to give these films some homage. And they were definitely a niche. And there's always a need, I think, for independent filmmaking, given the commercial success of big budget blockbusters. They're just so few and far between, and there are so many creators out there. So it's just wonderful that there was a platform back then for the independent filmmaker, and so that stories like these could be told and told in a way that didn't seem, schlocky or low rent, but that they were done with a lot of professionals, and they were still made and still seen. And now they get to have this resurgence, which actually validates everything that we did in the beginning. Because, as an actor, you kind of feel like, oh, well, if I'm not an A-list actor, I'm no good. And that's not true, because there's just
no, not at all.
It's just a list, and a lot of those people, don't always stay on that list, or they don't survive that list, or whatever. But it's kind of nice. Like I look at my own career, just speaking about me personally. It's been, I've worked a lot, but then I've also really had a lot of a life. And I appreciate that because I get, kind of pseudo recognized. I'm like recognizable adjacent.
Yeah. The right kind of people recognize you. The people who watch the good movies recognize you.
When I'm at a convention or things like that, people know who I am. But as for like a regular life, I've had a really great one, and I've also had a really fun career where I can go back and do shows like this, and really the nostalgia is killer, and the people were amazing, and it's like any job really. It's about the connections and the relationships that are formed during that particular time in your life that really mean something. It's not always the job, it's the people, right? So
100%. Yeah.
yeah, so it was really an honor to be invited to do Wings documentary. And I just actually ran into the editor about a month ago at a premiere for No Address, a film that my friend Kristana Loken is in about the homeless crisis in this country. And Bill happened to be there, and he was like, "Oh my God, I've been looking at you all day long," because he's been in the
right.
riding up the elevator together at the DGA. And it was just like, and he's like, "Oh my God, the PM movies." I'm like, "Oh, I'm going to be going to Cologne, Germany in August to do a premiere for Alexa." And, the remastering and redigitalization of all these films is really giving them a whole new life. And I really appreciate people like you who have a fondness for them, who are giving an entire podcast platform to them. So thank you. That's very cool.
Oh, well, thank you. No, that's very kind. So your first movie with PM was The Art of Dying. How did you get cast in that? How were you aware of PM Entertainment films in general?
I believe my agent sent me in for an audition, and I do remember this audition because I was married to Lorenzo, and I showed him the sides, and the scene that they chose had me holding a gun on Wings, on his character.
Right.
And I mean, this is back in the 90s. So, everything back then was literally hitting this tipping point of risk, I would say, of taking risks and doing things that you would probably never do, that you would never do today.
No.
And it was different because every audition was in the room. There was no such thing as self-tape. It was always prepare. You were in great shape if you could put the sides down and not be holding on to them, and using a prop, and with a gun, I mean, these days, most people would just go in and use their hand. Well, Lorenzo had just bought me a Lady Smith & Wesson, I think, for Christmas. and it was such a great little handgun. It just fit in my hand perfectly. It was so, I just fit right in my purse. So when I walked in, I said, "Look, I have a prop. It's a gun. It's not loaded. I will show it to you. First of all, before I take it out, are you comfortable with me using that?" And they were like, "Oh yeah, definitely." So I did. So I opened the chamber. It's an empty chamber, but it gives the power the way a prop gives power, the way a costume gives the actor the sense of character, the way lighting helps you feel the mood, the way, things like that actually are really worthy tools for an actor to use. So I did that scene with this Lady Smith & Wesson right in Wings' face, because he was there in the audition, actually doing the audition with him. And it brought the juice. right? So, but it was, but that was A, I asked, B, it was Wings Hauser.
Yeah.
It was a casting director, in other words.
Yeah.
So like a casting director, I think there's definitely a solid boundary that should be just nothing but respect and making people feel safe. They see too many screwball actors all day long to really welcome that kind of activity. But I read the room and I asked. So it gave him the shivers, and it gave me the power, and then I think it also got me the job. So that was
Oh, that's fantastic. And so Wings was
good
there,
on him.
Yeah, right. I'm sure he loved that. I'm sure he was all about that.
That's how we do it here in LA. I'm LA born. It's very much like Texas here, but different.
LA is a great place. I love LA. I've been several times. So you were in the room. You're doing the scene for Wings. Who else was there? Did you get to meet sort of Joseph and Rick straight off the bat? Were they the ones kind of orchestrating the casting, or were there other people there?
I don't think Joseph or Rick were in the room. I think they were really just leaving it up to Wings. There might have been an assistant in there filming it, because they put everything on like a VCR so they could go back
videotape,
and watch. And Rick Pepin was the DP of
he filmed it.
Right. He was the camera operator. He shot everything. So he was just always on set. He was never really in. And Joseph did a lot of directing too. So he was, but that place was a bona fide factory. That was such a bustling place to work. And my brother ended up working there quite a bit. He worked on about 80 films for PM.
Oh, nice.
And one of his best friends, who he met on PM, who was already an employee, Gil Wadsworth. He's amazing. You should get these guys on as like crew if you ever
would love to. Yeah.
Now, and Lorenzo too. I mean, like, they found out that I was married to Lorenzo pretty quickly. And then that's when my relationship with Joseph really started to develop, because he really wanted Lorenzo. And he started talking to me about what Lorenzo would want to do. And I said, well, he's a black belt in 3 forms of martial arts. So anything with that. And then I think that came after.
How aware were you of sort of PM Entertainment, or was it just you just went in completely dark, apart from obviously the audition and knowing who you were going to be working with?
I didn't really know any of their movies really, but I knew all the people that were making their movies. Right. So it was more like, I guess I probably was way more of a pop culture person who just went to the movies. And on occasion, Lorenzo and I would go to a Blockbuster and go pick up a VHS for something that was like, hey, wow, we didn't see this in the movie theater. Where did this come from? Mickey Rourke is in this, or like, oh, wow, look, it's Eric Roberts again in movie number 572.
Oh, bless Eric Roberts. How many movies has he done so far?
Well, I just did a movie
a year
with Eric Roberts. He plays my dad. So I was so excited for this movie to come out, because he's like, who doesn't love Eric Roberts, and who hasn't already been in an Eric Roberts movie? He's like,
he's his own industry. He's his own institution. It's quite incredible.
He really is. Like, everybody, forget the Kevin Bacon thing. We're all related to Eric.
Oh yeah. I mean, 3 degrees. I'm probably 3 degrees from Eric Roberts. I mean, everyone's done something with Eric.
No,
he's
I'm
fantastic.
0 degrees. I just worked with him, so I feel like And he plays my dad, which Margot Robbie just had happen in Babylon, which was amazing.
Right.
Where I was at that time of my life, in my early 20s, and just really starting to get into the business and work kind of like steadily, it was just forward momentum for me. I was just like, okay, I've done this, that's done. Now this. Okay, what's this about?
And especially with PM, they made so many movies. They were making 5 movies a year. There was no time to necessarily sit around and think about it. And so I think that it's interesting now because we're able to sit back and, like I say, you're able to watch At the Art of Dying over and over again, go through it, think about it with modern eyes, going back looking at it with modern eyes that may not have been on set at the time. But it gives this really interesting dynamic because Wings is showing this like masculinity in decline kind of thing that was sort of happening in the 90s. And you're showing this very, I think, could be seen as quite a feminist position in a way. So talk a little bit about that. Talk a little bit about the dynamic between you and Wings, and also I think some of the trust that must have been involved.
Well, yeah, that's for sure. There was a lot of trust. I mean, and I think it started from the moment I walked into that audition room, talking to him about, look, I'm already taking a risk here by bringing in a prop that could be, just completely rejected. No, don't do that. And, but he was so welcoming from the get-go. And because I think I was bringing something to the table that showed a lot of courage, kind of, like, hey, look, I'm very comfortable with this. I'm comfortable even traveling with it in my purse from my house to this audition room. So I think that because of both of us having a very strong sense of self, and yes, he did want to show a solid vulnerability to his character. And with that, the female counterpart wasn't going to fall. She was going to rise and lift him up. And I thought that was a really great dynamic too, because that was part of our culture. And I mean, who knows? It's probably just always been part of our culture. We need to raise each other up when someone's feeling weak and vulnerable, and the strong need to come in and go, here, we got you, whether it's a man or a woman, either or. It really doesn't matter. I don't know that, because in the end of this movie, I'm like the damsel in distress tied to the train tracks of the original talkies.
Yes.
Now I'm just Burning Man style, right?
Yeah.
So it's literally like, I mean, there's so much metaphor. Burn the witch at the stake. There's anything to do with fire is just so violent and horrific to begin with. And I really loved what Wings did with making his character just absolutely normal and approachable and fallible, a wounded hero, a reluctant hero. It is so much more interesting than some, Dudley Do-Right who's just always got it going on and is completely unrealistic. So I think that what the PM movies really were about as a whole is that, we're human, and people, they don't always make it. They don't, there's things that can happen, and if you really, really try hard, you can maybe make it stop, right? Like that was like the hero of every one of their films was they had issues. Each hero.
Yeah. So, no, definitely. And Wings also seemed to have a great sense of humor. Is that fair to say? I mean, right down to when I think of, we talk about that ending and we talk about how as I said before, it's sort of a Wings Hauser movie wrestling with a PM movie, right? And it's sort of like that Die Hard ending where the girlfriend and the boyfriend are back together and so on. But just to make it a little Wings, there's a guy because it's also a commentary on Hollywood, the place, not the movie factory, but the place, Los Angeles, Hollywood. So right at the end, there's a guy with a pink Speedo on that's right up his butt crack as he rollerblades through the scene, which feels like a very kind of Los Angeles in the 90s kind of thing to happen anyway, right down to the point that I asked Joseph about that scene. I said, is that like, did that just happen and Wings kept in the movie? Like, did someone just rollerblade through the set, or did Wings put it there? And he said, I think Wings put it there. So that to me is just a great way to kind of, then he pans off to the Hollywood sign. It's just a great way to end the movie, to kind of be like, in this city of madness, you know what I mean? In this city of just sort of random, wonderful, bizarre things happening, there's also this sort of seedy, weird, dark underbelly. And then there's people at 2 a.m. rollerblading around in a pink speedo.
I was in Hollywood last night at the Dolby Theater, walking down Hollywood Boulevard from Musso and Frank's down to Dolby, then back again. Yeah. And it is literally still the same. It is that. And that, I thought, was one of the most realistic add-ins that he could have done, because that is the truth in this city, especially down there. It's a circus, and the circus doesn't care if the elephants got loose. I mean, well, they do care if the elephants got loose, but I mean, it's a loose circus. That's what Hollywood is.
Yes.
It's the big tent is just, I don't know, the sky, the Hollywood.
Right.
And everyone, it's literally like, it's got some kind of invisible bubble around it that when you enter it, it just says to you, you can be whatever you want to be. Nobody cares right here. You're in Hollywood right now, so you can be as freakalicious as you feel like it. And you're actually adding to the scene by doing that. And it's appreciated. It's not looked at like, oh my God. It's looked at like, oh yeah, who's got a 5 spot? I want to give it to that guy.
Well, it's funny, for all the independent or a lower budget people that I've talked to, whether it's actors, movie makers, producers, whatever it is, it's very, without getting again too serious or off topic, but it's always interesting to me that seedy underbelly, or whatever you want to call it, of that Art of Dying is kind of commenting on. I suppose the casting couch, or whatever kind of catch-all phrase people use it for. It was obviously really interesting to see that. And I'm not saying that it didn't happen in independent filmmaking. I don't know. But when you look at someone like a Roger Corman, when you look at someone like a Charles Band, when you look at someone like Lloyd Kaufman, or when you look at Joseph and Rick, and I'm just picking out these guys who ran like the independents compared to the big blockbuster guys. There haven't been, and I'm not saying there aren't, but there haven't been a lot of scandals about those guys. It's interesting that the scandals have actually come about in what would be perceived as the mainstream industry. But the guys who were running and gunning and making these little independent films, and films that often feature violence and sex and gore or whatever, that you would assume, on set there was no protections and everyone was mistreated and everyone just kind of showed up. Actually, when there's a documentary on Roger Corman or a documentary on people, actresses especially show up to support them. I mean, Pam Grier talks about Roger Corman giving her a career over and praising him and everything else. You would think, so watching the movies she did and some of the movies that came out, that there was more exploitation there, but actually the exploitation seems to have happened in the majors, not in the minor. Am I right in that? Did you feel safe and comfortable with some of the scenes you were asked to do and things in movies?
100%. My mom is Abby Dalton, or was Abby Dalton, and still remains Abby Dalton. But her first films were for Roger Corman. Walk All Night, The Viking Women and the Sea Serpent. She started her career in Roger Corman films. I started my career in a Roger Corman film, starring in Phoenix the Warrior, which I think they've changed the title to She-Wolves of the Wasteland.
It's still Phoenix the Warrior on IMDb. It's still Phoenix the Warrior on IMDb, but he probably released it under multiple titles. Yeah.
But I've seen it on VHS, and they've changed it. But
different titles, yeah.
Yeah, maybe it's because those guys made movies that got their yayas out within the confines of the creativity.
Right.
Obviously Shakespeare in Love was not doing it for Harvey Weinstein. He needed to be doing something more along the
Right.
PM lines, and then he probably would have, well, who knows? He was just a despicable human. So
A scumbag, yeah.
yeah, complete chewed up gum rolled in cat hair. But he's just, I mean, I never even met that guy. So I don't
Yeah.
know. I never got into those rooms. And I'm glad I didn't. I'm glad I just had a strong husband always and just had, somebody that was looking out for me. And my mom always said, just, don't do things that make you uncomfortable. Just don't do them. Just say no.
Yeah. And I think for us, as I say, who watch a lot of the more what would be considered B grade or exploitive films, it's nice to know that we can watch them and to some extent have a sense of safety about watching them rather than feeling that there was true exploitation happening, I guess.
Isn't that nice? Isn't it nice to know that you can actually be a fan of something and talk to the people that you're a fan of and still remain a fan after you hear all the BTS, it's because a lot of time it can be serious bullshit and then you're having to promote something or you're just wishing it would go away. And fortunately, I mean, all the stunts that were PM Entertainment were practical. There was CGI was not available or affordable, even if it was, for these guys, and they didn't use it. So everything you see is that's a real person doing it, running from that explosion, being ramped on an air ramp, or being pulled by a wire, or falling off a building. Burning high falls were legitimate burning high falls.
Yes.
And there's it's weird because they're smaller films, so you kind of but you're still risking your whole life. And people were safe on these movies because they really took the time. They call it the pyramid: quality, time, or money. And they say you can't have all three. But I think that you can definitely do your best to make that happen. And I think because Rick and Joseph were so good at this formula that they had created, and the people that they had working for them, and everyone took it very, very seriously. It was, we didn't have intimacy coordinators or choreographers, whatever they call them, but I never felt compromised, and I never felt exploited, and I always felt really championed, and it was always an honor to be asked back to do it.
And last couple of things on Art of Dying. Obviously, as I said, Joseph, I think, originally wrote the script. Wings has then stated in interviews that he wrote a lot of it as well, as he felt there was sort of some lost in translation stuff, but also some stuff that he wanted to bring to the table. But it also feels, watching it, and I feel like this way watching a lot of Wings Hauser movies, that there was a lot of improv as well, and a lot of exploration almost of the characters and things in the scenes. How much was on the page, and how much of it did you and Wings kind of figure out yourselves?
I honestly, I don't really remember improving too much. But we probably got whatever was on the page. And because he was the director and the actor, I think he would allow for, keep it rolling, just whatever feels natural. And it was just completely a pleasant experience. There was never a moment where I thought, wow, we're really going off book here, and where is this going now? I always felt like we were going towards the same destination. Sometimes improv, I'm a writer, So I
Yeah.
have always really respected that. I know how I toil over words when I write. And
Yeah.
you want a rhythm, you want a freshness in every scene. And what can happen, I think, sometimes when people do a lot of improv and you might be repeating words that were in a scene before that you were never in. And
Yeah.
how they cut the film together and people are saying the same thing. I don't know. There's just certain things that can happen along those lines.
Totally.
So
Yeah.
they always had a script supervisor, which I feel for any independent filmmaker, that's one job title that you don't want to scrimp on. That's a
Right.
quality job that really keeps, they call it the Bible for a reason, is because it's the words
Yeah.
that were toiled over by somebody who counted them and looked at them and made the page count right and signed off on it and said, okay, this is it's not a blueprint. I mean, it is, because there's 3 movies you make: the movie you write, the movie you film, and the movie you edit.
Yes.
But it is the blueprint for the actors to follow and get as, letter perfect as possible without making it seem awkward. But I think that, I think that Wings and I, we rehearsed our lines, we read our lines, we were very conscious of what the story was, and yet we still were able to make it maybe seem like it was more improv-y than it actually was.
No, I just mean that your chemistry on the screen, but also some of the dialogue scenes as well. They have such and I know Wings had this tendency in general in all his movies, but they have a very naturalistic feel to them. They have the scene you were talking about where you are obviously pointing the gun, the audience doesn't know who you are. Are you who you say you are? Or is it, a role-playing game or something? In that scene, once the fact that you are role-playing and it's not a real thing breaks down, there's a real genuine just sense of naturalism, I guess, just a real playful sense of you guys having genuine chemistry and having genuine, these are lived in characters rather than, these are just 2 actors doing a thing. So, and I always look out for that. And it always feels like when sort of Wings is doing, when he's sat on the beach later and he's ranting about something, you often wonder, you go, well, how much is that just Wings spouting whatever is on his mind, or how much was that on the page? So it's very interesting to me, because I think it adds a whole extra layer to the performances you're both giving, that so much of that was on the page, because I'm like, that's incredible, because you both present it so believably and naturally. And like I say, you're both unafraid to show vulnerability, but you also in a genre that was traditionally, filled with masculinity and bullshit, to be honest. You bring such strength and vulnerability, yes, but you bring such strength and a self-assuredness is probably the best way, and it works so well, counterbalancing, as I say, Wings' kind of confusion at where he finds himself, I guess.
Really said it's about trust, and trust plays such a massive part in this type of artistry, and the days are so long on a film set because it just feels like you're moving through ether. Everything just seems to be on slow motion, even though everything's happening fast and people are moving and doing their thing, but they're lighting the scene and you just have to create this kind of trusting relationship so swiftly. But I think because Wings is just Wings, and I just adored him instantly, because he was so willing to play and willing to hear ideas, and just like, he's like a big teddy bear guy that just, loves this type of sandbox. And because of that, it just made it so relaxed to work with him. So I think that what you saw was such a comfortability factor that was able to create an instant relationship, which.
And did you guys stay in touch over the years? Did you become friends, or was it really just while making the movie? No.
No, thank you. Next. No.
Okay.
No, but what's funny is that his girlfriend, Darcy DeMoss, I've known since 5th grade, 6th grade, since I was 12, 13 years old, and we're still great friends. And I brought her on to be a part of his documentary as well when they called me, and I was like, oh gosh, you gotta call Darcy too, because such a huge part of his life. In fact, that's Darcy on the cover of The Art of Dying.
In the red dress.
Yeah, in the red dress.
Yeah,
that's Darcy.
Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah. Another thing that I noticed in a lot of the films, you're often on horseback, and there's always that joke in actors when they talk about it. Well, I can ride a horse on my resume, but really I've never been near a horse. I assume though you grew up and/or during your acting phase got very comfortable with horses just based on some of the scenes you did with them. Is that true, or was it winging it each time?
No. Both of my parents were solid equestrians. My dad grew up in Burbank. I'm pointing like it's right over there. Burbank. And he would mow a lawn and get a quarter, and he would immediately take that quarter down to the stables and go for an hour ride. So he grew up riding. My mom grew up, she had an Arabian horse named Erp, and I have the most epic photos of her and this horse, this gorgeous roan dapple gray. And so they were both very horse people, like urban cowboys, I would say. And so I grew up in Toluca Lake, really close to Burbank. So I started taking horseback riding lessons when I was in 3rd grade, English riding, every Wednesday after school.
Lovely.
And then I got my first horse when I was 15, and it was 2 horses so that my mom and I could ride together all the time. So I am an equestrian through and through. I've had several horses, and I don't have a horse right now, but I have my girlfriend's horse who I ride all the time. And so I've just always been around them, and I'm very, very comfortable with them. I think horses are so beautiful for cinema, and they've been our cinematic friends forever. And I think that it adds a certain power to somebody when you see them on horseback. And it really gives them some flair when they actually know how to ride. And the horse looks comfortable, and the shot is cool, and it gives it this like boom, 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 There's something about the horses.
Going back to Pollard and Douglas, Pollard's role in the movie, weirdly enough, is essentially doing all the detective work.
Yeah.
He's the one that figures out, well, it can't be Latin Jerry who's stabbing the guy because the stab marks are coming down from the top. So therefore they have to be a taller person.
Right, which in this kind of movie, when a guy reads out some CSI information there, that probably goes like right over everybody's heads, including Wings. It's like his character is like whatever.
Well, this is sort of the last thing I wanted to kind of point out about the movie, because it's interesting that while it has some film noir pretensions and genre trappings, he's never a detective. Wings isn't. like Pollard does some detective. At one point, Pollard's like, he must be filming the stuff. And I'm like, I don't know how we figured that out. The knife I'll buy because of, okay, I'll get there's some CSI shit there. But like, I don't know where he pulls out of his ass that he must be filming the stuff. I don't really get that.
And he says something like, I'm going to have people check every acting school and anyone who's bought major cameras in the last little while, but they're in Hollywood.
Right. And Wings literally poo-poos that. He's just like, no, I'm not doing that. That sounds like a lot of work. Like, yeah. And you sort of say to yourself, right, but what are you going to do? And at one point, and I think that's there's like one rewrite to this movie away from it being sort of perfect. And the rewrite would be just a few of those detective scenes. And I know you would sort of end up removing Pollard from the film and replacing and just making Wings kind of a competent detective. But I mean, if you just added a little bit of through line, because essentially the way it all works out is he happens upon Latin Jerry, waits for him to come out of the thing, gives chase. Latin Jerry is accidentally like mowed down by a car and actually has his head removed it's from a long shot, but you see like when the dummy gets hit between the two cars, you see the head like flip off and roll down the road. It's right in the background. You can't quite see it, but Latin Jerry dies. And then what's interesting is that, and why I think the romance between Roscoe and Latin Jerry, Machara and Gary Wentz, is that Gary Wentz then puts himself in massive danger by being like, well, now I'm going to come after the detective, which is always the stupidest move, a serial killer that nobody knows about, because everyone's after Latin Jerry. Like that's all Wings knows. Wings doesn't even know Roscoe exists.
Right. So it could have all ended right there.
Right. Now, there is another body that's discovered, and Pollard comes over and says, you see, I told you it can't have been Latin Jerry. It must be someone else. But that's all he says. They don't know who it is. There's no fingerprints or whatever. Like, they don't go, oh, and it must be this guy. Gary Wentz just goes to Wings Hauser's house and then follows Kathleen Kinmont home and leaves notes everywhere for Wings Hauser. I'm like, if you hadn't have done that once, you could have kept killing people, because Hauser's got no intention of actually detecting anything. So
that at least leads to how much of a psychopath he is.
Right.
But
yes.
It does put him into this weird little like Batman villain, the Riddler-esque type of persona, though.
Right.
Because I think by the 90s that was sort of over, but the 70s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, there was a lot of these urban legends of there were snuff filmmakers out there. And, right. History proved that that's not a thing. But he does it where he's like, but I'm going to homage Hitchcock as I do it. And I'm going to have this giant film camera on my shoulder as I do it. Like a supervillain would do it, almost borderline on like a 1967 Batman villain, the way he talks to them and what he does. And then the very fact that he shows up, just sort of sitting there, talks to the girlfriend, then talks to Wings, basically says to Wings, hey, you killed that guy, and you know why I know.
Right.
And he just says, oh, I heard it on the news. And this but he says it in a way to be like, he might as well be like winking really hard as he does it. And it's literally a come at me kind of statement. But of course, immediately Wings doesn't get that. He's like, oh, what a creepy guy.
Yeah, right. Well, what's interesting is that the third act of the movie essentially becomes, a Gary Wentz revenge thriller. Like there's another movie out there where, Roscoe has the love of his life killed and he avenges.
Even if you did it from this story where it was just the concept of the other side of the villain, where the villain doesn't think he's the villain.
Right.
And therefore realizes what's happened to him. A lot of times, like, the monster becomes the monster because that murder has happened at the beginning.
Yes.
But they were already just very comfortably, again, dwelling on the mental illness part, which is, again, why it's still 1991. And, of course, a lot of people may look at it going, you had to make them gay because that makes it seem like it's adding to their mental illness, because he's very much... Jerry is just a sleazebag guy.
Right.
Except for the moment, like we talked earlier, where they sort of look at their work and you realize that Jerry thinks this is art too.
Yes.
But through the beginning, from the end, Roscoe thinks he's an artist. He thinks this is legitimate and is beautiful for what he's doing, which makes him the kind of guy who you would like have to shoot 3 times before he fall down because he's so unaware of anything other than what he thinks is real.
Yeah, and I'm not shying away from sort of saying, that there are stereotypes in this movie and that there are things in this film that are, with modern eyes, problematic. Of course there are. It's from 1991. It's a low-budget movie. It has Wings Hauser in it. It's exploitation. It's fully exploitation. I mean, it's one of the most sort of exploitation-heavy PM films that exist. It's sort of outside of their earlier ones, actually. If you watch stuff like Shotgun and some of those ones, they have some exploitation in them. But really, for the slightly later, and this is only slightly later because it's 91, but for sort of 3 years into it and with the bigger budgets, this is still quite exploitation territory. And when you're talking exploitation or grindhouse or B movies, call them whatever you want to call them, anyone who's going to reach out and watch this movie or even listening to this podcast is going to be okay with the fact that, yes, with modern eyes, there are lots of things to question in this movie. But also, to kind of go back to a little bit of what I was saying earlier as well, it's also this weird dichotomy that lives in Wings himself a little bit, which is that, yes, he has all the trappings of, the big brash 70s machismo, drunkard actor, right? He has all those trappings. And yet, throughout his films and throughout his interviews and throughout people who've known him, who've talked about him, he was actually maybe more, I'm not going to use the word progressive, that's probably not the right word, but probably more socially conscious than his persona might lead you to believe. For example, one of the other movies he directs and writes that nowhere near gets the release that these movies do, but it is literally a movie in which him and Linda Blair go up against skinheads and racists and whatever to protect their homosexual son. So, and that's something that he wrote and directed. You don't get many, homophobes or racists who are going to be like, I'm going to make neo-Nazis the bad guys in my movie who killed my gay son. You know what I mean?
Yeah, which again is because it's the time period, because it can't dwell or explain on those kind of things. I can imagine in certain audiences would be to nitpick of like, well, why did they choose that? Why did they choose this demographic? And I think in the long run, I think he's a realist, which is really what the case is. Then he's aware that all these differences exist, especially when you've been doing so many things in LA or in those parts of New York.
Right.
You've been living around these different lifestyles, that it's not a joke. It's not totally, you got to dumb the films down to your audiences to make them sort of stereotypes, but they all have this element. Like I said, they all feel like his partner at the beginning. They feel like they've had a life before this. The Jerry and Roscoe feel like they've had a story to tell before this.
Right.
A lot of these other films feel like we've invented the villain, we've invented the hero, but there's definitely stories that all these characters have had before, which I think, especially in a lot of the real machismo PM entertainment films I've seen, they don't feel like they have that. I don't feel like Gary Daniels and Junior McQuaid had a whole lot of stories before they went on down The Ultimate Warrior after in Firepower.
Right. No, exactly. And I think also there are far worse examples where they've made homosexual panic the reason for the killer becoming the killer. In slasher films and in, bad action films and whatever, or where homosexuals are portrayed in movies in the 80s and 90s as incredibly flamboyant and incredibly over the top and pretty ridiculous. I think my point earlier about the rather touching scene, but also in general, just the way the two actors play the role. Sure, Latin Jerry is over the top and sort of a little wild and crazy and silly and prone to outbursts and whatever, but no more than other villains, regardless of their sexuality, are in movies. Oh, yeah. Whereas what's nice about the way Gary Wurtz plays, like what I'm saying is, nothing about their killing has anything to do with their sexuality. They're not killing people because, as I say, of homosexual panic or because of being in the closet or anything like that. There's none of that indication there. There's also no indication that they are in any way ashamed of who they are, ashamed of, their lifestyle or their love for each other. It also is a movie in which he says quite clearly, I loved him and you killed the person that I love in a genuine way. And at no point does Wings go, you pair of F words,
Right.
Like
he actually has this sort of reaction of
right.
Oh, I see what's going on. And then
kicks him off the roof.
Yeah. When he's holding the girlfriend hostage about to set her on fire.
Right.
And that's when he says the line of, you killed the person I loved.
Yeah.
And Wings says something of, well, no one's going to hurt you now.
Right.
And he says this actually logical, emotional reaction line, which comes, I think, in any other action thing, be it big budget ones. If Arnie was in that situation, he would have said something so sarcastic.
Right.
And right in this moment of like, my love's about to die, but you just said you love him. You wuss? Like he would have said something like that.
Yeah,
but
there's none of that. There's no F word in here. They're not called pansies or any kind of derogatory term. And again, look, you might be like, John, stop trying to, put a cherry on top of something that's horribly offensive. I'm not. I'm just saying that there are with movies, there are levels, there are, and you have to take everything based on that particular situation and that particular movie and that particular nuance. You can't just go, well, it's an exploitation movie and therefore the gay characters in it are stereotypical and awful. I actually think there are levels in this movie where they are not quite. Now, I'm not gay, so I don't know what the gay community would feel watching this movie. They might be offended by it, and if so, I completely understand that and own that and appreciate that and would never say that this movie is not offensive if that's how that community feels. I would say, though, I have seen, to your point, I've seen much worse in Hollywood movies. I've seen much worse language. I've seen much worse depictions of homosexuals that don't state it with such care or genuine emotion that this movie does. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't know where I'm going with all of this, but
I think that's why it's worth talking about. I think if I met someone, a friend who would, if I showed that to someone and they were like, I'm offended by kind of the stereotype of it, I feel like even for them being offended, they would still be interested enough to discuss it because the characters have levels. When in many other movies, when that comes up, even if by script it was done the same, many other films would handle it in a very plastic, flat way, which shockingly this movie doesn't. For the goofiness, the things that happen in this is why this movie has some heart, and that's why it makes you think about it more. When many other movies that would do the exact same story, was when we bring it down to your one paragraph of this, what the story is, you wouldn't be talking about it. You wouldn't have that effect on you. Let's end this film with
you're going to kick me off a building?
Right. Yeah. Which it's not the same building that he threw the woman out of, is it? It looks like it's almost the same banner. Like somehow he went circle on it.
Oh, yes. We have to mention the very last shot, which is fucking phenomenal. Right. The last shot. Yes. Go for it.
I think you're going to say what I'm going to say.
Yes.
As he's speaking to the girl, the ambulance is there, and she says who she really is. Right. And this is an element that he never knew. And it's a big twist that she is also a cop. And we're like, that means nothing.
Well, except that he said, I would never love a cop is what he said. About
and then, and that was part of the reason and so forth. But then he jokes it off by saying that again. And then goes, and she goes, we should move in with each other. And he's like, oh, okay. And the camera pans away and a guy in his shorts on roller skates goes by who gets a name in the credits. He is the last name guy on roller skates.
He's wearing a pink Speedo that is stuffed very far up his butt crack.
Right.
And you have this thing and the saxophone comes up.
Blaring.
Here's the end of the movie. And Wings just has a guy go through on a pair of roller skates with a Speedo rammed right up his butt crack. It's almost like Wings just and then it pans to the Hollywood sign. And that's why I said in my introduction that this is something of a parody of Hollywood itself. I really do think Wings is saying with that ending scene is, I know the cliche of this scene. I'm going to add a little Hollywood thing to it, meaning Hollywood the place, not Hollywood the industry. I'm going to add a little bit, you do get roller skating weirdos going around Hollywood, you know what I mean? And Speedos at 2 a.m. Like that's a thing that you are perfectly accepting of in Hollywood at that time. So I'm going to throw that in there, but then I'm going to pan over to the Hollywood sign because I'm just going to it's almost like his, like his sort of like That's All Folks kind of ending, and it's his way of kind of going, it's just a movie, folks. There's
after it's been very dark, and just as it pans over, as we see the guy roller skating by who steals everyone's attention, it'll make you miss what the two people by the ambulance say when someone's closing up the ambulance, and he mumbles, let's just go home, Jerry. There's a guy in the background who just mumbles, let's just go home. And as if like we are admitting that we are closing this film.
And that's what I mean is that I think this is another thing. I think Wings, probably seeing, it's a little bit Taxi Driver-ish, seeing the way New York had become a cesspool. I think seeing the way Los Angeles became a cesspool. I think that's what he's trying to say with the movie a little bit. I think there's a little Taxi Driver in there.
Oh, and I mean, again, with like part of the reason why it took me so long to see Art of Dying, as I brought up at the beginning, was my shock of his character in Vice Squad. And the worlds are very similar in these two movies. So knowing that, I was afraid that Wings was going to be this really awful person, especially when I'd seen clips that kind of allude that he has a very big breakdown in this, but was so relieved at how, as much as his life is terrible and he admits that his life is terrible in this, he still kind of just goes through it as a hero, and at the end you get that sort of safety in it when you've gone to some very dangerous places in this. In Vice Squad, when it gets dangerous, there's very little relief of that.
There's no safety there, but you could do a supercut where this movie ends and Vice Squad kind of begins. I know it would be like 20 years earlier or whatever, but I mean, you could do that and then intercut it with the movie Angel, where she's like a high school student by day and hooker on Hollywood Boulevard by night. Those three movies you could put together in some kind of wild supercut.
I think that's a big sign of like why the studio B movie doesn't exist so much anymore. You've either got the low B movies that I deal with for my Terrible Fest and with my scene, or you've got your Hollywood films. The studio B movie, like PM Entertainment or Canon or those guys at the time, barely exists. And because they don't exist, we don't talk about Hollywood as that kind of Hollywood anymore. People don't, but at the time they were constantly doing it because they were films that could get released and we could all see them, but they also weren't 100% owned by these bigger budget studios who would tell them, don't say that. Don't talk like that about it. But this is the same town that, that Lizzie McGuire lives in. We can't do this.
Yeah, exactly. So lastly then, favorite scenes, ranking within PM Entertainment films, if you've seen enough of them to rank it, and ranking within Wings Hauser movies. So do you have any favorite scenes? Just list a couple off before we go.
Easily the throwing of Wilma, as her name was, and we know it's Wilma because the lug abusive husband shouts, Wilma, sounding like Fred Flintstone when she flies out the window. That will shock you for the next 3 minutes that you'll forget what's said. And then, of course, the weirdest sex scene of all time that seems to go on, and at one point it comes back and you're not sure if it's the same sex scene or not.
No, they are having sex all day, and it keeps cutting back to murders, to the police station, to all sorts of things. It cuts back and forth, I think, even to her going to the Roadhouse where the jukebox is playing. I think that's even in the midst of that one long sex scene.
And in the world of PM Entertainment, that sex scene, I think, ranks up there as the top only close B, not but B, just so close, just underneath it at number 2 is the picnic flashback scene in Skyscraper, which is, again, the most unsexy sex scene you've ever seen. Of two people who do not want to be doing this. At least it kind of feels as weird as it is, and maybe it shouldn't be here and I shouldn't be watching this, it does feel like the two characters in Art of Dying want to do that.
Yes. Okay. So favorite scenes, yes. Sex scene, definitely. Opening scene is fantastic. I've got to give it up for the random bunny rabbit on the beach scene. Where the hell that came from, why he has a bunny rabbit. It's never mentioned before or after. I don't know whether it's a reference to something or whether he just liked bunny rabbits. I've no idea. Him feeding booze to the bunny rabbit is a favorite. Ranking within PM entertainment films, if you can.
Like if you want to give it like a number or something, I don't think I can do that. Also because there is so many that even I could maybe say I've seen a quarter of the mass titles of PM entertainment, but
even I've only seen half their output. So
right,
and I'm doing a show on them.
So what I could say is though I do think that it is way more cerebral than your go-to, more popular, gets talked about on the internet enough PM entertainment films, which again is a reason why every time someone reminds me that it is one, I'm surprised. So as in quality, I think it's very high on there. So
it's in my top 10. I put Living to Die above it, but it's in my top 10. And again, I have 3 or 4 with 5 stars, and then I have 15 movies all with 4 stars. So it's difficult to kind of put a number to it.
But number 6 is obviously Magic Kid with Don the Dragon Wilson.
Yeah, sure. Sure. But no, it's up there with, I think it's very close to Living to Die and Killer's Edge, which are the 3 better ones. I'm not a big fan of Cold Fire. That was the first one he did. I put it near Zero Tolerance and Guardian Angel and Inferno, which the one Jean-Claude Van Damme PM entertainment film that they made, which is actually my favorite Jean-Claude Van Damme film. And I didn't even know it was a PM film until I sat down to watch it, and immediately it became my favorite Jean-Claude Van Damme film, because that is a highly underrated film. So in terms of Wings Hauser movies then, where would you put it on a Wings Hauser list?
I mean, I definitely put it in my top 5 of those. And again, to still compare with PM in general, when I mentioned at the beginning that like my favorites are things like Hologram Man and Firepower, because those are the cartoonish, those are the 80s kids and me type of films.
Yeah.
But I can still say out of everything that I have either helped produce for films or made or done for my festivals, I can see the difference between something that I could say is my favorite, but I can still say that Art of Dying is better. Yes. I think it's definitely better than those ones that are my favorite. It's not the kind of thing that I think I could watch every day, because I think you have to be a lot more invested in it than I could be with Firepower. I could have it on, go make a sandwich and come back and have really missed nothing and still be in the groove with it. But you shouldn't do that with Art of Dying. You should be sitting there, maybe have a bottle of whiskey at the side of you for it, but you should be sitting and watching it in the dark and getting into it, which in the Wings world, wow, that's a thing to say. I'm making a hat that says that.
Yeah, living in the Wings world.
Out of quality of his performances, I'd even maybe put it in the top 3. I don't want it to be there too close to Tough Guys Don't Dance, but right. It is on that level, because if someone else took that, if you took away the sexy jazz and put in more avant-garde jazz, and all of a sudden there could still be a Twins Peak-esque thing going on in Art of Dying, because as I said, there are moments where if you really wanted to be artsy with it, until the end, you could believe that half these people only exist, all these other great walking characters in Art of Dying only exist in Wings' head. Yeah. Like, he's the only one who has real interactions with each of these people. Yes. And which is very interesting and a little trippy sometimes.
Indeed. And again, it's in my top 10. It's probably in my top 5. It's, and my top 5 varies, but I really love Dead Man Walking. I really love Nightmare at Noon. I really love Tough Guys Don't Dance. I love Mutant, also known as Night Shadows, also known as Creature. And I love Living to Die. So it's in amongst those. Those are the ones that I consider really top tier Wings. I need to rewatch The Siege of Firebase Glory. It's been a long while for me. I think I gave it 3.5 when I watched it. That might change. I gave Art of Dying 4 out of 5 on Letterboxd. But it's up there. It's in the top 5 or 6 for me. So just a great movie. I hope everyone goes out and watches it and rediscovers Wings. And I was thinking to myself, like, you know, with the Wings documentary, with the PM Entertainment movies being released on Blu-ray in Switzerland, and with this show and various other little things that are happening, I feel like we're at a cusp of something really interesting and potentially big happening around these films and getting in terms of getting rediscovered. You know what I mean? I feel like 5 years from now we'll have a bunch of hipsters claiming they always knew what PM Entertainment was, and I'll have to beat them down with sticks.
The thing is, and it stands out, I think, heavily, especially at least of what I've seen of the catalog. Also, just in general, of early 90s video sexual thrillers that existed at the time, which were everywhere.
Yes.
But it stands way different, maybe because of the pulpness, the noirness of it. But I think a lot of people will mix it up with the dozens of Shannon Tweed and Jeff Fahey movies that appeared, where Jeff Fahey was addicted to cyber sex and the internet, so the mob killed his wife, who was also played by Shannon Tweed. That movie doesn't exist, but it does, and there's so many of those, but this is different. It looks the same because of the cover. Again, if you explain the basics to people, it sounds the same, but it's not. It's much more different than that.
And Wings did a legitimate one of those with Bedroom Eyes 2, of course.
And, again, if you've only known him from some of the pop things, you could think, being Wings, that he would do that. But the fact that he, again, is a shocker, he's an enigma, he can do these other things. And I hope, sadly, it takes passing away for people to start talking about it and knowing that. But I hope that people will give more of those I don't want to say award-winning, because a lot of them were, but ones that people didn't realize how much more of himself was in it.
Yeah, no, definitely. Great. All right. Well, thanks ever so much, Adam. Best of luck with all that you do, and we'll speak again soon, I hope.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
And you can find Adam anywhere where the words Riot at the Movies appears. They're on Tumblr, they're on Instagram, they're on YouTube. Go check out Riot at the Movies with Mr. Adam Riot Thorn. And also, why don't you go over to Amazon and pick up his book, Riot at the Movies, Bad Movies and Booze, The Life of a Terrible Bad Movie Addict. Go support him, why don't you? I'm about to buy it myself. All right, take care now, have a great time, and we'll be back same time next week.
You are now leaving the PM Entertainment Podcast.